What's up, my fellow poker enthusiasts? It's Rene, aka the Wacko here, and together with my co-host Adam Carmichael, we present to you the Mechanics of Poker podcast. In this podcast, we deconstruct high-stakes poker players, figuring out what it is about them, how they think, what they do that makes them so successful, with an extra focus on the obstacles they faced and the skills they had to develop to surpass them. Over the years, me and Adam have gained a lot of experience in both reaching high-stakes poker ourselves and teaching other players to do the same. We have bundled all this knowledge together in our coaching program, the Mechanics of Poker, which is the most complete poker coaching product on the market. If you want to have a chance to work with me and Adam so you can get unstuck and make more progress in your poker career, go over to mechanicsofpoker.com to apply. But without further ado, let's learn from another high-stakes player's journey in today's episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Mechanics of Poker podcast. Me and Adam, we are very excited to start chatting with today's guest, but before we introduce him, we have a quick announcement, because if you want to work with me and Adam to improve your poker game, now is the chance. Because during the next 2 weeks, we will be accepting new applications to our Mechanics of Poker coaching program. We're looking for 10 students to join the community. So go over to mechanicsofpoker.com, fill out your application, and get a chance to take one of the available places and have me and Adam improve your poker career. If you guys think that online poker is dead, then pay attention, because today's guest is 30-year-old Austrian high-stakes cash game player Josef Schusteritsch. I'm probably butchering that. Sorry, Josef. AKA Sunny92 on PokerStars. Probably one of the few players with an Austrian flag who's actually Austrian. Josef started his poker career only a few years ago when COVID hit, starting at 50 NL Zoom, crushing his way through the pools, becoming one of the biggest winners on PokerStars in 2022, whilst mainly playing 3- and 4-handed and eventually reaching stakes as high as 50-100, making him actually one of the fastest and most recent risers to the high stakes we have had on. Today, we're going to try to uncover his secrets to make it more likely that our listeners, you, could replicate this impressive progress that he has made. As always, we are joined by my lovely co-host, Adam. Adam, throughout your career, how often did you think poker is dead? And how often did you find out it was actually still very much alive?
Well, I started my poker career about 3 months after Black Friday. So all I heard the first year was, what are you doing? Poker's dead. Do something else. It's not a game. Then I started playing heads-up sit and goes, and I was playing regular speeds. And after a few months of playing those games, maybe 3 months, those games literally died out and the kind of format switched to hyper turbo. So my first year was like, am I doing the right thing? Are these games going to die? And then probably 3 years into my career, maybe 4 years, they introduced a spin and go format, which is a 3-way format, which competes with heads up sit and goes. And again, all the talk was like, the format's going to die, and yeah, there's going to be loads. Change your career, basically. So yeah, you hear it many, many times. It's very interesting how it always feels real. Right now, we've got the GG Rake scandal going on, and everyone's going to say that high stakes games are dying. So there's always the next thing that makes people worry. I think the main thing is the games are good, games are beatable. There's people making money. Do you want to be one of them? And Josef, our guest today, is one of those people who did not get deterred by any sort of news that things were dying. He started his poker career in the heat of COVID, basically, when he went pro. And yeah, we're going to uncover how he's been able to rise through the volatile poker world so quickly to playing high stakes. So yeah, really interested to know what he's been doing differently, because obviously very, very fast progression, and yeah, interested to know what he's doing different to the other players we spoke to.
Yeah, guys, get your pen and papers out, make notes, because I'm sure there's a lot of wisdom that's going to be shared in this pod. But before we start talking to Josef, big shout out to GTO Wizard for sponsoring today's podcast. GTO Wizard has made studying poker accessible for everyone, and in my opinion is one of the best places to go if you are serious about improving your poker game. Next to having access to all GTO solutions for every spot and having the ability to upload your hand and have Wizard find it for leaks, you will get access to weekly webinars in which various coaches, including myself, educate you on the most important spots to start crushing the game. Go over to gtowizard.com/mechanics to get started, and you will get 10% off on your first month. That is gtowizard.com/mechanics. At the end of this podcast, we will have a giveaway where you can win 1 free month subscription to GTO Wizard. So make sure to stick around. But for now, without further ado, let's start talking with Josef. Hi there, Mr. Josef. Wie geht's?
All good, all good. How about yourself?
All good. Thank you for coming on.
It's
agreeing to come on to share the story with our audience.
An honor to be here.
I know. I saw that in the questionnaire that we asked people to fill in. One of the high points for you was actually being invited to the podcast. So we feel very humbled.
I mean, like this. This is so many people that I kind of looked up to throughout my career have been here. The likes of Moonestar, Dude, like all the legends of the game, and now I'm sitting here and are allowed to present some of my opinions, which is very great, and I kind of see this as an honor. So this this is definitely one of the high points so far. Let's put it like that.
Nice. Okay, so we have a new definition of success. That's why you get invited onto the Mechanics of Poker podcast. Linus, love, if you're listening, your career is not complete without coming on the Mechanics of Poker podcast.
I mean, it depends probably on what your goals are. If like
true, but if we now establish that that's kind of the new definition of
that's right.
Then,
maybe we can set a trend.
Hasn't made it yet, so episode coming up with Linus very soon, guys. So I wanted to congratulate you, because we usually ask people like, hey, how long did it take you to get to high stakes? And you were actually the fastest riser and also the most recent riser we have had on. And indeed, you beat the likes of, I think it was Dot and Kudinov. They were kind of shared for first in 4 years. You managed to do it in like 2.5 to 3 from the beginning all the way to high stakes. Very impressive, very impressive.
Thank you.
And I think the goal today is to try to educate the listeners to see, how they can, I would say mimic maybe your journey, learn something from your journey in order to make it more likely that they will succeed as well. Poker, this is actually something that, or in general, playing cards, from what I understood, was nothing new. In the Schusteritsch household, card games were a regular thing, I believe.
Yeah, that is very true. So usually at like holidays or like occasions where the family met, I remember there was always like after lunch, after dinner, when there was like 3 time, generally like my uncles, my fathers, like the whole family were into card games. It wasn't specifically poker, but like just different card games. So we got, like as kids, we got introduced pretty quickly into those. Like back then you were not playing for money, just playing for fun. And I remember, like I was pretty young. It was like when the poker boom came out. My 2 uncles were, I think, into poker a bit. I didn't really catch that necessarily what they did or how they played online. I mean, probably not extremely successful, because then they would have might have pursued that career too. But that's kind of where we got into poker. It's like where they introduced everyone to the game, and then we started playing for basically no money, or like no money at all. Just some sort of sit and go kind of format. Just nobody knowing what's up anyways. Everyone is just punting around, and was like a lot of fun back then. And this is where I first got into poker basically, and how things started, you could say. But that was just the occasional game for no money at all, like once per month, like something about that.
Yeah, the poker that was like the poker game with your family. You're playing other games as well.
Yeah,
like,
right. Yeah. I don't know like what
household?
Yeah, I at least from like my aunts and uncles, and like I think there were oftentimes, at least that's what my grandma always told me, that there was like often arguments where she had to stop the game because people were losing their minds. This is only what I've been told. I don't know if that necessarily is true. But yeah, like everyone wanted to win basically, and yeah, it was very competitive at that time, and still is a bit now basically when we play for fun.
Before being a professional poker player, you have used or maybe even further developed this competitive drive that apparently was very common in your family by playing League of Legends at a professional level. Has there been anything you learned being a professional League of Legends player that you think helped you give a head start over other players starting out their professional poker career?
Yeah, I think so. I think the League of Legends career might have made me one of the most tilt-proof poker players out there, because that
Tilting
game has such a toxic community. Especially, I mean, this was about, like, I think the career of League of Legends started maybe like 10 years ago, and back then you made little to no money. So I was a student at university, not doing anything at university, basically just playing League of Legends all game and then partying at the evening. Like, this was kind of my schedule back then. And depending on how successful you were, you could make, let's say, $1,000 to $2,000 per month, but it was not a fixed salary because you had to compete in weekly, monthly tournaments, and depending on how well you did, you basically like shared between 5 people, because that was like a team consisted of 5 people. So if you had like if you won a tournament or prize money for like $5,000, everyone had got $1,000, and you got, like, depending on how good you were, you could also be contracted to some sort of organizations that were marketing you, and then you had like a little salary. It was maybe, if back then it was like $400 or $500. It was not that much. So like back in the day, you could essentially live from it. Especially I was still living at my parents back then, so I had no expensive, and this was quite a reasonable income for me. And it developed over time where you could actually make more money. So back then I was most of the times traveling like once a month to like an offline event and playing from there, trying to compete there, and depending on how much money you made, like that was kind of the salary. But the problem with League of Legends is you, like, the improvement was 80 to 90% playing on your own, which included 4 other people, 4 other random people. So you were always matched with 4 random people. And back then, everyone thought he's just, the best player there is, and nobody, was taking any critique or whatever. So if something went down, the toilet in the game, everyone just started fighting and blaming each other and insulting each other. So it was really hard to focus on the game. And the problem with the game itself was that usually, or let's say on at least at a very high level, some mistakes you could not make up for at some point. So you could 5 or 10 minutes in the game, like a huge mistake could happen, and the game is lost, unless maybe someone of enemy team is gonna disconnect. Like, that's the only thing you could hope for. But the problem is you were still stuck for like another 15 to 20 minutes, because you could not forfeit the game until 20 minutes, I think, back then. So there was no way of you getting out of the game earlier. And usually everyone still tried to win at least. So it's not like you just told the enemy team to finish the game within like 2 minutes. So you were stuck with other 4 people just massively arguing for around 20 minutes. And it was very hard to keep calm, especially when you had, let's call them downswings, when you have lost like a couple of games in a row. Yeah, I think back then I was not so good at handling that, but nowadays I probably am better at that. And I think if I can relate this to poker, just in poker itself, you're the only one responsible for the outcome, basically, regardless of like what the result is in the hand. Like you're responsible for the decision, and the decision they made is either good or bad. And you're the only one that you can blame if you made a bad decision or a good decision. Whereas in League of Legends, there's oftentimes there were days where you lost 10 games in a row and you couldn't do anything about it because other people were just not giving a fuck about the game, and that was really, really frustrating. So I really appreciate being kind of the only one that is the one to blame. I mean, you can also see on the other side, if you play bad, you're also the only one to blame, and you have to deal with that. But for me, this is like a big bonus of poker compared to like video game, for example, where you have to play with random players.
Yeah, it's especially if that was like one of your main frustration point. Then if you find a game like poker and like, oh wait, I don't have to deal with these teammates screwing up, and I can only screw up. It's must feel very liberating in a way.
Yeah, for sure. Especially like the problem is I don't have a lot of problems, or like I'm constantly trying to improve. So if I made a mistake, or like same within poker, if I play a hand in a bad way, like I appreciate if someone else is telling me, or at least critiquing that play, and then we can discuss whether this makes sense or not. And the same thing for League, but in League you always had the problem that, you know, it wasn't in any sort of constructive way. So like you were already down because you made a mistake. Now you know that you kind of ruined the game for people, and then there is you know, that they keep, you know, going onto the guy, or like keep just arguing for 10-15 minutes. It's just some days were just unbearable in that regard.
In terms of strategy, do you see any similarities between Legends and poker? Or I guess maybe League of Legends has taught you how to think strategically, but then again, with the games in your family, maybe this has already started.
Yeah, probably. I don't think there's a lot of similarities in terms of like strategic aspects that you can take away, but I think definitely the mental like the mentality aspect of, you know, being able to appreciate being able to appreciate being the only guy that could be blamed for an action is pretty nice, so to speak.
No, yeah, that's something I can definitely understand. I'm curious. Like, you're clearly a very competitive person. I'm curious, how does competition make you feel? Because I can imagine that for many, competition, especially very tough competition, can be quite intimidating, and people might even shy away from participating in a game or playing in a game. But for you, it seems to be the opposite, and it's more of a motivation. What makes you not shy away from it, but go towards competitiveness instead?
I mean, the best example basically is if I play a game 3 or 4-handed, which I probably do in almost every session I play on like 2K or whatever the stake might be, especially on stars. The games that I enjoy playing the most is like the toughest, you know, 3 or 4-handed games, because in those kind of games I just get challenged the most. For me, it kind of feels easy in like playing games with recreationals or like weaker other professionals, because they are not really trying to push you to the limits. They're not really testing you, and it's very clear for most of the game tree where you know, like where the decisions are very obvious whether this is like a good or a bad one. Whereas if you play against like really good other players, you will be oftentimes put into spots where every decision is like super marginal, and you will be forced to find edges, if there are any, that are really 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 like small. And this is kind of the driver that I have. Like I just want to like basically play in the toughest game that I can, how to say, make a case for affording to deal with the variance. So like if I think that the variance can be no problem and I'm not losing like an insane amount, and I think I could at least break even or slightly win in a game, I would never shy away. And also what I would say is that kind of my goal is to become, or like be the best possible poker player that I personally could be. And in order to achieve that goal, like my sort of game selection shouldn't be only weighted towards which is the highest EV game to play in terms of like money. So long term, if I look at it long term, if I play in super tough games, I constantly have to improve, I constantly have to study, and I constantly have to play my A game, and I'm not really allowed to slack around, because like these guys, they're really good, and if I start not caring too much, just, you know, playing B game, I will probably lose a lot of money very very quickly. And this kind of is the driver for me why I still want to play in those games, because I want to constantly improve, and I'm not ready to just, you know, settle down and play recreationals for the next 5 years kind of only, because I still see room for improvement, and I just want to become better than I was like a year ago.
What is your definition then of a good poker player? Because, for example, you could have a player, let's say he made $1 million, okay? But he never battled. He was always there behind his computer, jumped in the game when it was good. A very, very good professional bum hunter, so to speak.
Yep.
Okay? That's kind of what he excelled at. But let's say you have a guy who only made half the money, but he was battling it out with the boys, you know, on the poker test tables. he made only half the money, but would you then say, and he's probably tougher to play against, would you then say he's the better poker player?
I mean, I don't think you can give a clear answer to that. It's always like in terms of, you have to put into perspective what the goals are of like different players. So if someone is saying that his goal is to make as much money as he possibly could within the next, well, like mid to short term, then the guy who won $1 million playing the software games is the best poker player, because I think it's just like the goal and the mix of what you're doing probably defines what the best poker player is, and that's like very subjective to everyone. Obviously, you could say the guy that makes the most money is the best player in terms of, you know, money wise, to have some sort of measurement. That does not necessarily mean that the guy that makes the most money is the best technical player, has the best skills, or knows the deepest about the game, basically. So the guy that makes the most money does not necessarily need to be the best technical poker player, but you could say that if you take into consideration like getting into games, especially live games, like with social skills and stuff, that whatever weighting you put onto these different categories, like the guy that made the most money is the best player, and the guy that makes less money is, you know, less of a successful player, so to speak, because he was just playing tougher games. Whereas this is where you put things into perspective. If you would consider what's going to happen next 10, 20 years, and if your goal is to play for the next 10, 15, 20 years, then probably the guy that is now trying to become as good as possible will just remain longer than the guy that is only bum hunting. So this, I don't think this is kind of a question that can be answered easily. Like, you probably need different measurements, which everyone would have like different opinions on, and so I could just give a personal opinion of like what a good poker player could be or is.
Yeah, to kind of help you out, where I've given this some thought as well. Like the word poker player, you're then automatically I see you go, yeah, but is he really a good poker player? And then in your head, you probably go, do I find him tough to play against? You could also label it like one guy is maybe more professional. Okay, that if you then say, okay, he finds the right spots, makes more money, so therefore he's a better professional. Maybe the other guy is actually a better player. I definitely agree with you that if bum hunting is all he does, then at some point, you know, everyone improves, and if he's not improving, at some point he cannot anymore find a game to
Exactly.
play, basically,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think it's always very important that people, the audience listening, to answer that question for yourself, because someone might be doing a lot of battles, but he wants to make the most money now. Then that's maybe not in line with your goal at the moment, right? Or maybe someone is doing a lot of bum hunting because he learned that, you know, you should game select, you shouldn't battle, but it's actually very competitive, and that's actually what drives him, and that's actually what his goals are. So I think it's very important to kind of answer this question for yourself, so you can align the table selection in this case with your goals.
Exactly. Like, I totally agree with everything you just said.
Have you also experienced any negatives around being a very competitive person? For example, I know you like to play football, ice hockey as well, but not at a very serious level. So I would guess that is more of a fun activity. Does this competitive then sometimes get in the way of that? Maybe getting too upset when things don't go your way. You know, you're on the ice hockey pitch, someone gives you a bump, you punch him in the face. Ice hockey, very, very rough game.
Nah, so like the only thing that really upsets me is when I did poorly. Like, I don't really care if we lose or win, as long as I did the best possible that I could like contribute to the game, kind of, or like at least, you know, I'm somewhat satisfied with what I did. So as you mentioned, it's not on a competitive level. I just do it like as a hobby, as a recreational. It's just an amateur level. And to add to that, like, I was doing a lot of sports and also a bit more competitively when I was younger, and I had 2 knee injuries and had to undergo 2 surgeries. So like nowadays my focus is just to have fun, to be somewhat, you know, competitive, and not to injure myself. Like, this is the main goal, just to do sports while not injuring myself. And therefore, like, I don't have high expectations of, you know, like, I just don't go in and I have to win every single game, even though obviously I try. But it's more important to have like a nice game, have a lot of fun, and then also like just sit down with the other guys, have some beers, have a good chat. Like that's basically the main goal of playing nowadays.
So your competitiveness doesn't get in the way of
No,
you having fun.
Not necessarily. No.
All right. Yeah. Sometimes, you have some of these guys. I remember recently there was a guy in my football game that seemed to every week try to start a fight, like in a friendly Wednesday night football game.
Like I don't
"Dude,
understand
what
this.
the fuck
Like
is
this
your
is just
problem?"
insane. Yeah, like it's insane.
Like in dirty play, kicking you. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? We banned the guy from the game, luckily.
yeah,
Because,
that's. I mean, that's insane.
But also in terms of like, if you play like a friendly card game nowadays at the family, you lose, you take it well,
Yeah, although like we're still occasionally playing poker at our house, like ever since I started playing professionally, and this is the same thing as like like 6, 7, 10 years ago, just the sit and go format where it's like super speed, we're raising the blinds every orbit kind of, and it's just insane structure, and I just happened to bust like very quickly oftentimes, and then especially like my brother is mocking me a bit, so but it's fine. That's something you have to take, that's okay.
you get the classic, I thought you were a professional.
Yeah, something like this.
It's always the same, man. If you play poker with non-professionals that know you're professional, as soon as you lose a hand, they say, "Oh, I thought you were a professional."
It's like he's winning, 2 back-to-back sit and goes within like 1 hour, and then he's like, maybe I should start playing online. Like it seems like easy, and I'm like, dude, please, just before you do that, give me a phone call so we can have a talk about this one.
That seems like a very good idea. Moving on a bit forward, like when you finished uni and didn't further pursue your League of Legends career, you started working in finance. How did you transition from working in finance to pursuing a professional poker career? You maybe missed like.
I think I have to correct you because I never finished my university. I started working when I was, I think, in the 3rd semester or something. So that
you quit uni to.
Yeah, I mean it was kind of an awkward situation because there's still military service in Austria, like that you're obligated to do that. And due to my knee injuries, I was temporarily unable to go there. So I had to go there every year to do a checkup. And when I was in like I was like 1 year into university, and let's be honest, I was playing League of Legends, and the focus of doing good at university was very low. So I went there and I basically got checked up and everything was all right. So I was now allowed to go there, and I could make the decision whether to do it now or at the end of the period that I was allowed to study. And at that point, I was honest to myself, there was no chance of me finishing with that time. So I had the decision whether to go now or at the end where I was close to finishing. So I did that at this point, and in Austria you can choose between military service and then some sort of social work or social service, like for a year. And I did like the social work stuff and got into a company where I was helping out in the office. And back then there was like the CEO or the guy that was responsible for this department saw some potential in what I was doing, and offered at the end of this time offered me a job in like a position in finance where I would need a degree on the university to apply. So he basically trusted in my capability and abilities, and back then that was like a really good deal for me, so I didn't have to go back, and I started in like a really well-paid job. And yeah, I took that opportunity and started working in finance at that point. So this is kind of how it went.
All right. And then I'm curious, what made you give up like your professional League of Legends career? Was it then the fact that you got this job?
It was it was a mix between that. So at that point, we had an offer from the organization that was kind of sponsoring us to move to Germany into a gaming house, and basically the only criteria that I wanted is that everyone, because the team that I was playing with were playing like for around a year together, and everyone was knowing each other, and was like a really nice couple of guys. And I just wanted to have these guys to move to Germany if that was the way to go. So I think we agreed on doing this for half a year or a year, and then we see how things go in order whether this will be anything for the future or not. And there was 2 guys that couldn't see themselves pursuing this. They didn't want to leave their home, and they didn't want to move into a gaming house. So I said that I would turn down, because they also offered us to build like a new team if someone were to leave, like just find other people. And I was like, no, like I don't see this happening. I don't want to move in with strangers now where I don't know whether this is like where I connect to these people and I know and I get along with those guys. And at the same time, basically this offer came in, so it was kind of an easy decision to make, because like this one seemed like a bad choice and the other one seemed like a good opportunity. And that was kind of where the professional career was over. And then at that point I still was playing, like, let's say semi-professionally, just playing like local tournaments, Austrian leagues or like German leagues, where the amount of time that I had to invest wasn't that high to compete on this level.
Bomb hunting the League of Legends scene.
Yeah, I mean, the game developed so quickly that it was kind of tough to do that. Probably similar to poker, where if you don't spend a lot of time and you actually do other stuff on the same time, it just gets too much, and then you just fall behind, and you either have to make a decision whether this is worth it or not.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you got this opportunity at the finance job. When did poker get back in the picture again? Like, yeah, I can imagine that if you only do finance, League of Legends, I guess if you played a bit on the side, it probably feels less fulfilling, right? You're not as good as you could be.
Exactly. And also
a bunch of 14-year-olds kicking your ass. That's what I hate about online games, man. If you now play, if you go sit in Counter-Strike, you hear like the microphones as a kid of 12.
Also, the lifestyle was really fucked up for me, because I was working full-time, and when I came home, I basically played 5 to 6 hours of League of Legends every day still, because I didn't want to disappoint the others. I just wanted to keep up. And at that point, I think I was sleeping probably 4 to 5 hours on average for like a longer period of time, and that was just really, really, really bad. And at some point, I just figured this has to stop, because I was really drained. So yeah, I stopped. I mean, I didn't stop fully playing League of Legends, but like on a competitive level, I was just still playing for fun at the like after that. But I could just take days off and then just play whenever I wanted, and wasn't really forced to play in order to keep up with the guy with like all the other guys. What ended up happening then was at the job, like the first 1-2 years were really nice. Like I learned a lot. I had to do like all the new stuff took like quite a while to finish. But after like 2 to 3 years, there was like the regular stuff probably took me half the time or maybe even less in order to finish. So there was like a lot of free times. Then obviously year from year, there were new projects that took some time, but there was still like quite some downtime that back in the, or like at the time where I still was playing League of Legends, I filled up with just looking at some, some replays, looking at some other professionals to study a bit of their game and stuff like that. And when I stopped playing League, I obviously stopped doing this too. And then I suddenly had, let's say, an average from 1 to 2 hours per day where I wasn't really occupied at the work. And I also didn't want to go to the guy that was in charge and said, yeah, dude, like I got nothing to do. Just give me more, because it kind of sucks to just being 100%, like just having to do 100% of the time every single day. And at that time, I think it was like, let's say a year or something later, I can't recall when this exactly happened. I stumbled across like the Lex Veldhouse stream on Twitch, because like Twitch was very popular for League of Legends. And I think it was on a final table Twitch front page. And I looked into this because I know back then when I got introduced to poker, I saw some videos of him at WSOP, like some highlights and stuff. Obviously, I had no clue what the fuck was going on. But I recall this guy, from the videos back in the days, and I was like, yeah, let's watch it. It was fun to look at him playing, to look at the game. And I kept being interested and kept watching like poker-related streams for like quite a bit. And then at some point, I decided, like let's play a little bit for online poker again. And actually at that time, I was just playing tournaments and complete fumbling. I had no clue. I didn't know what ranges were. I had no idea about the game. I was just sitting there for fun, playing, you know, 10, 20, $30 buy-in tournaments, maybe most of the times 1 or 2 at a time. And I remember I binged like a bounty builder in stars. I think it was like for $30. And I don't know what was up top, like maybe 4 or 5K that I made at the time. And I was like, man, what the fuck is this? Like, I'm rich basically. Started playing some 100 zoom, some 200 zoom, and then like some regular tables. And yeah, it didn't go that well. You know, like I had no clue what I was doing back then. And yeah, I lost the majority of this back then, which wasn't that bad because it got me really frustrated. And then I started, you know, trying to dig deeper because I figured there's some people winning in these games. There must be some sort of strategy. I don't think that some guy is just gonna wake up and be that poker genius that just is figuring out that the fly and is doing that. So there has to be some sort of idea behind that. Yeah, and then started digging deeper. Slowly understood what ranges were, that you just play the same hands pre-flop every single time and not just your favorite hands and that kind of stuff. And yeah, this is then how I got back into poker. And then I started, you know, trying to be more reasonable, learned about bankroll management and all the important stuff. And yeah, at that point, I think I was just grinding, you know, NL10, NL20 with like a few $100 without busting my roll, basically. And at some point, there was a, because I was looking at a lot of free poker related stuff, and then there was like an advertisement that came up where some cash course from Bluff the Spot was on sale with like 40% discount, 50%. I can't remember. I think back then I was like, yeah, whatever. Like, I don't know what I had today, but I really felt like buying that one and just using this, and was curious about what's in there. I think it was 400, 500, even $600, something like that. And that was already on discount, so to speak. And what you got was like a video series and pre-flop blanches, like the legendary pre-flop Bible. Nowadays, like everything what I bought there is heavily overpriced for the content that you get. But I mean, back then I didn't know. Still, I don't regret buying it because I now had, even though the ranges were not great, let's be honest, I still had a pre-flop plan instead of just doing nonsensical stuff. That already helped a lot. But there were a video series of like introduction to Piosolver and how to use Piosolver. And at that point, like I was hearing that, you know, the term solver and GTO and blah and all that stuff for in streams and so on. But I had no clue what the fuck they were talking about. And when I first saw the Piosolver and how to work with it, my mind was basically blown. Like I did not understand that at this point I wasn't using something like this in order to improve the game, because I was just making up wild theories on how to play and, you know, just, you know, the human thing to do. I do this because of that and stuff like that. And that basically blew my mind. Like that's kind of where I first realized that there, you know, could be a chance of becoming really good at poker. So that's.
Is there anything similar for League of Legends? Like, is there a solver for League of Legends?
No, I especially back then, everyone was just, you know, making up things, just sitting down and then theory crafting about stuff, trying it out in like real games. And I think nowadays it's very advanced, and I'm not up to date with what nowadays coaches and analysts and so on use. But something like a solver, there's not, as far as I know.
So you start to grind the solver. Do you remember some of the first big aha moments you got when we started to grind the solver? Like the first aha moment, I guess, that there was a solver and like, oh wow, this is a strategy. Like you said, I don't only play my favorite hand. By the way, I still have a favorite hand. Shout out to my favorite hand. You still remember like what
but
aha moments?
I mean, back then I didn't know that things in poker that are like generally everything that is very valuable is very expensive. Like I thought this was just insane prices, and I saw Pio. I understood what like the output was, and I mean back then I had no clue how to use it. But no, I just paid $500 for this course, like something around that. And then I Googled Piosolver. I got into the website and I saw $400 of Piosolver. I'm like, now come on, I'm playing like 25 and L. Like I can't just spend $1,000 at the time for poker. So what I did, I was trying to find alternatives, and the thing I started with was an app that had some sort of post-flop database where you could train spots. I mean, the ranges, preflop ranges were bad, the game trees were bad. Obviously, I had no clue back then, but I was like, I think the subscription was like a yearly subscription was $50. I'm like, all right, this is cheap. This is something like that's a reasonable amount. Let's try that one out. And what I started doing is just playing, the trainer while I was at work, on my phone when I had downtimes, and did that for like a couple of weeks, trying to improve that way. The only problem that I have doing it that way is when I was playing at home or at the weekends or whenever I had time and I decided to play, I started marking spots, and I could not look up these specific spots in the solver because, let's say the board was Jack 10 deuce on the flop. It was a 3-bet pot. In the application, you could only choose you want to play a check high board and these positions, and then in of out of position, and then obviously if it's single raise pot or 3-bet pots. So what I ended up doing is if I had marked a hand that had this board, I started playing the application until this board eventually came up in order to get my answer, kind of what am I doing here. And sometimes I was spending like half an hour playing a spot, sometimes brainlessly just clicking through in order to get to this one board that I wanted to look at. And then the game tree was so bad that the takeaway was, back then I thought I figured it out, but nowadays I know that was like complete nonsense. So did that for probably a couple of weeks, maybe like 1 or 2 months. And I got really frustrated at some point. I was like, no, I can't do this. Like this is not the way it goes. And at that point, I found out that there is like a cheaper version. It's like GTO Plus, like so I bought that for $100, obviously not knowing anything about how to construct or how to put import ranges, how to build post-flop trees. And back then I wasn't really connected. I was doing everything on my own. So I had to figure it out myself, kind of. I know that after getting GTO Plus, the first 2 days, I think I spent probably 16 hours of just putting in the ranges manually. Just, every single raise pot range put in, every 3-bet pot range put in from every position versus every position, just insanity. And then I started running my own sims, and the outputs were absolutely insane. Like I did not understand anything because the outputs were so far off from what it's supposed to be. And at that point where I got GTO Plus, I joined a community that there's like a Discord community where they were talking strat. And what I did, because I was kind of, my ego was preventing me from asking others, because some of them were playing in the same games and they were already talking about Pio, and I didn't want to look like the biggest idiot. So what I ended up doing is I posted like a hand or a spot and then asked for the Pio solutions, and then ran the sim myself in order to compare the solutions that they had to the solutions that I had on like a lot of streets. And I was just trying to mimic what they posted me. So I just started changing the tree until I finally got the solution that they also had in Pio. In order to have some sort of correct game tree. Let's put it like that, a correct solution. Like thinking about this nowadays, I could have just probably saved 200 hours if I would ask a guy, dude, can you show me this? He's taking like 1 hour of his time, and I would not have spent 3 months of my life doing like that stupid stuff that I did. But yeah, like afterwards, it's much easier to argue in that way. Yeah, so this was basically my start of the solver era, basically.
And that's usually what you get, right? You don't want to spend too much money, but usually then in the end you spend way more money. Also, if you take in consideration, you go cheap there, cheap there. I once heard an expression, pay bananas, get monkeys. I find it makes a lot of sense. You know, you pay shit, yeah, you don't get any good work because you get monkeys. Monkeys don't do a good job. Yeah, like you said, valuable stuff. Yeah, it's valuable for a reason, so the price is higher for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays I can clearly see that, but back then when I had no clue, I figured that this is just absurd, charging these amounts for you know, reasonable stuff.
But you were not a professional back then, right? You were still at your finance job and doing this on the side.
Right. So at that time, I think this was like maybe half a year before COVID came in, where all these things started, where I was like grinding and studying a bit on the side. And then COVID hit and everyone was just working from home basically. And working from home, and during COVID, where the company was more in a crisis mode, there were no projects, and sometimes even the regular tasks, they were delayed because there were more important things to do. I had a lot of downtime, and at that point I decided, yeah, it's time to get Piosolver, because I was a bit tilted about my GTO plus solution, and I was still not 100% convinced that like my solution is 100% correct, because it was GTO plus, and I was just clueless back then. So I figured, yeah, let's just, you know, invest another $400 and get Piosolver. And basically that was the time where I started studying like super deep, in terms of just spending probably 2 to 3 hours per day, at least the first couple of months, trying to run my own sims, start playing trainers, trying to understand spots, and so on.
What were like some of your first things that clicked for you in terms of understanding? Like you first had these apps. I guess intuitively you maybe think like, this doesn't really make sense. Then with GTO Plus as well, weird solutions. And then I guess the Pio solutions also intuitively made more sense to you? Or were there like moments where you were like, oh, wow, actually, this makes a lot of sense?
I think at the start it was just an overload of information, honestly. I could look at solutions for like quite some time and ended up just clicking buttons when I was playing. I just couldn't really process all the information, and back then I also did not have this thought process that I might have nowadays, where I really want to understand, or like I try to find for answers in spots. I was just looking at the solution and then trying to copy that solution, if that makes sense, which is,
yeah, you're trying to look at
absurd.
What do I have to do here?
Exactly. That was exactly what happened back then.
And then you came to the conclusion, oh, it's quite big to remember what to do in every spot.
Yeah.
I was so that you made then a sort of conscious decision. Okay, I'm going pro. How did your environment respond to that? I guess your uncles are your biggest fans now.
Yeah, I mean, they were always pretty supportive, even with the League of Legends part. Like they were kind of, you know, cheering me up to do whatever I wanted, or pursuing stuff that were kind of uncommon, because I think they could also see potential with all that stuff. My parents at the start, so the way it was I was still working at finance, or like working from home when COVID started, and basically the games and COVID, I think this was also like where I got really lucky in my career. This is where I started. I think at the start I was playing 50 Zoom when COVID came along, and the games were so good that basically with like prefab ranges and some sort of strategy, you were winning. And then additionally to that, I think I was running really, really pure, like now that I look back, because at 50 Zoom, I had a lot of days where I was just winning 10 buy-ins per day. I mean, I probably played like 3 to 4K hands on like a good day, which is quite a lot. But I think the first 100 or 200,000 hands, I had to be sun running because I wasn't like a good player, and I made a lot of money. And at that point, I was thinking, holy shit, like this, you know, like I probably made somewhat equal amount of money in 100 Zoom as I had in like my regular job when I was running that good. And this just went, like the money just went up and up the bigger in stakes I went. So like on 200 Zoom, it was still higher. And I did not really tell them that I wanted to go pro for like the longest period of time. So for myself, I already knew that this was a scenario, like a possible scenario in the future after doing this for like half a year or a year. But I really wanted to make sure that, everything is safe, everything is kind of secure, and I don't like just punt around, because at the end of the day, I would just give up like a decently paid job that is very secure for a career where, I could have just sun run for 200k hands, and the next 1 million hands, I find out that I'm a losing player and everything goes down the toilet at that point.
So you had like a certain awareness of like the luck involved.
Yeah.
You were aware that you could maybe have just been running good.
Yeah, I mean,
that requires a lot of self-awareness. I think a lot of people are like, oh, apparently poker is my calling. I'm crushing all the pools.
No, I think I tried to be as rational as possible about that matter, and this was the first time I told my parents that I wanted to do that. They did not know how much approximately that I made, and they were like, "Are you sure? Like, you have like I have a secure and well-paid job, and this sounds like a bit dubious and stuff like that." And I'm like, yeah, if I make the decision, just trust me that this is like a reasonable one. I'm not just out there gambling. Yeah, like, so I basically was just keeping it a secret until I knew I had won a reasonable enough amount in order to convince them that this is like, because I did not want to give them any sort of troubles in terms of like them thinking about me and then being worried about me, if that makes sense. So I think when I was playing close to 500, or like was playing 200 Zoom and then started playing 500, this is where the time that I told them that as soon as I have to go back to office, I will not do that. Because at that point I was still working from home and could play poker reasonably, like a reasonable amount of poker because of that. And they were like a bit perplexed at the start. And then I told them how much money that I made this year. And they were like, all right, that's an amount that, sounds reasonable. And then they were like still worried about like, is this sustainable? Like, is this just luck and so on? And I was like, back then, this is what I filled out in. I had sort of the benefit of having this sort of safety net, always being able to go back to my job if that fails. So a lot of people do not have that opportunity. And when I had to go back to the office, when COVID, like everything was calming down and everyone was going back to regular stuff, in Austria, you can choose to do some sort of educational year where you basically take 1 year out to educate yourself, whatever that might be, while still getting paid. I think it's around 60% of what you got as your normal salary. So I just had to pick some courses that I did throughout this year that are very low in effort that I could do on the side to basically use this as my trial year of being a professional poker player. And this is what I told them, I'm just going to do this and then play poker on the side. And if it doesn't work out of the year, I can always go back. And I think this had a huge impact of them, never being worried, because like there was always this kind of this secure feeling that, if I'm just punting around and I'm losing all the money, then I can still go back to my job and have like normal life, or like a regular life, so to say.
I did this story sounds very familiar. I remember when I told my parents, I first told my dad, and then my dad said, "Oh, your mom is gonna ask this, so that's what you need an answer for." Like my dad, he was on board straight away, but he said, "Yeah, you have to convince your mother." And I remember my mother said, like, "You have to give me black and white that you're gonna go back to university." I said, like, I couldn't find an internship. I said, "Okay, for the next 9 months or so, I'll do this poker thing." But yeah, you're gonna go back to university. 9 months later, I want a black and white. Yeah, sure. 9 months later, I was on a plane to Brazil, but that didn't really work out. I'm curious, did you have any sort of like role model maybe that you could look up to, or also that you could show your parents, like, hey, listen, this is not just me inventing a job. Like, there's various people I can show you that do this for a living, and that do very well.
I mean, not necessarily. What helped is that my uncles were like, a little bit more into this kind of not really seen, but they understood. They were more easily to convince, and that they knew that there were like a lot of poker players that make a good living from that. So, and they also, how to say, they always supported me that, and they knew that if I was saying that this is a career that is smart to pursue, then they would not judge or like they would not argue against it. They would just believe in what I'm saying. And then I think there was like some times where there was like the whole family involved and we were discussing this, and they were basically encouraging my parents and my father, like, this is fine, like he's gonna be doing okay. And yeah, that's basically how every time you had to convince a little bit more, and at some point, I mean, especially like nowadays, they are obviously very supportive with.
I can imagine this induced a lot more needles when you would play poker game with your family. Like, oh, you play your head like that, and you want to go pro? Are you sure? Something along those lines. I know all these needles, man. I mean, all poker players listening know all these needles that you get, Hi guys, Rene aka the Wacko here with a quick Mechanics of Poker 2.0 announcement, because we are currently open to receive 10 new players in our Mechanics of Poker coaching program. In our program you will get access to 80 plus hours of content in which we will explain you all aspects needed in order to become a more successful poker player. Now, one of these, of course, is the technical aspect of the game, in which I'll be explaining you all the mechanics behind poker strategies. We'll be talking about GTO, exploitive play, with an extra focus on the why behind certain strategies and why the population has certain leaks. And to increase your win rate even further, we've recently added a river bluff and bluff catching section, so you can increase your EV when those pots become very big. Our mindset and performance coach Adam Carmichael, he took care of the mental game and performance section of this program, in which he will teach you everything you need to know in order to break through limiting beliefs, better handle your emotions, break free from tilt, and play your A game more consistently. And last but not least, we've added the management and optimization section in the program, in which we will give you various tips and tricks to make it more likely for your poker career to succeed, and how to continuously improve as a poker player. Now, on top of that, this concept is continuously evolving based on feedback and suggestions we get from our community. Next to all this content, you will have access to our exclusive Discord community, monthly live Q&A calls, and one-on-one coaching session in which we are going to be reviewing if you have been implementing the stuff that we teach you in the Mechanics of Poker correctly. So do you think you have what it takes to master the mechanics of poker? And will you take one of the 10 available seats? Go over to mechanicsofpoker.com and apply for the program, and maybe you will get a chance to work with me and Adam and make more progress in your poker career. But for now, without further ado, let's get back into more goodness in today's episode. Adam, I'm curious, how supportive was your family when you said, hey, I'm off to Bali, I go play poker?
Well, I kept mine secret for a while. So I got a one-way flight to Thailand with some friends, which was disguised as traveling. And I kept it as traveling for about 8 or 9 months. And my mum kept ringing me going, how you got the money to travel? I'm like, oh, don't worry, I'm doing a few side hustle jobs, making it work. And then as like time went by, she kind of called me. Was like, Adam, tell me what you're doing. How are you funding yourself? I was like, oh, I'm playing online poker. She's like, oh, is that it? I thought it was going to be something worse than that. And then, yeah, luckily, like, she's yeah, she has high expectations of me. But then every year, obviously, I was going back to England quite often at that point. She was like showing me like cutouts from the newspaper. Adam, these jobs are here. I had a university degree, so there was quite a lot of jobs in sport that were available. So probably for 2 or 3 years, it was almost like, oh, this poker thing's going to play itself out. Then Adam will get a normal job. And yeah, all my family were kind of push me into normal jobs. Then as time went on and my kind of family realized I could support myself, they got more and more supportive and more just like accepting. Like my family still don't really know much about poker, how it works, but they just know, they trust my judgment to be able to sustain myself and what I do. So yeah, similar to Josef, where they've got that trust that you're not an idiot and you're not making dumb choices. And at some point they've got to go, right, you're 25, 26 now, right? Do your own thing and hope it works out. So yeah, that was kind of my kind of segue into it. So I'm really curious to hear about this transition year. So I love the Austria culture. This is amazing that you guys get given an opportunity to educate yourself for a year. And that's a very awesome thing, because obviously you get into work in your early 20s, you don't really know what you want to do. You don't know what skills you need, and you can end up in a job for a long time. This kind of 1 year break gives you an opportunity, by the sounds of it, to get 6% salary, but also to explore other options and educate yourself. Obviously for you, you decided, right, do something low effort and play poker. I did the same. But at the same time, it gives you opportunities to explore options, which I think is really good at that age, to explore what's next for you. So for yourself, you mentioned, which I think is so classic, this story happens, that as soon as you started playing professionally, or like you went pro this moment, that you went on the biggest downswing of your life, and it was 3 to 4 months of not winning. And this really created a lot of self-doubt. So yeah, I want you to take us back to that point where you're now playing poker, trying to prove to your parents it's a good choice, and you're going to massive downswing for a number of months. Talk us through how you dealt with that.
Yeah, I think I'm still like surprised that I'm sitting here now, to be very honest, thinking back at that moment. Because I remember back then, I think half a year prior, I first time like met my study partner that I studied regularly with, and we talked like basically every single day. And he knew that now that I'm now playing professionally at that point, and I was rolled to like my main stake that I was playing like 500, 200, and at that point taking shots at 1K if the game was good. And it was like a button just switched, because everything was kind of right. And then that month where I was not working or I was like the first month that I was playing professionally, so to speak, I was just getting absolutely demolished. Like every single day that I woke up, I just started my session and I just lost basically every pot that I was playing in the worst fashion also. Like 9 out of 10 pre-flop all-ins, I was behind. The 10th time where I got it in good, I lost. Like every time I had value, I lost. Every time I bluffed, I got caught. It's just classic, stupid downswing run. And at the start, I was like, yeah, whatever. This is just bad variance. This is just bad variance. And I think the first couple of weeks, I was like, yeah, that's just part of the game. Have to deal with that, and that's fine. But the problem is it just didn't stop. So like the first 2 months were like really brutal, where I lost like in terms of binds, like the most binds probably that I remembered losing like in my entire career. And that was at 500 and sometimes even at 1K, which was like the highest stake that I played back then. And I got kind of worried. And I remember like I'm really not trying to whine about like bad beats and stuff and try to like not be emotional or be mad or angry about the spot, but I really started to complain about how bad I run to like my study partner back then, I think on a daily basis. It's like I woke up, I started my session, 10 minutes in, got cooler twice, I took screenshots, sent him, all right, here we go again. It's another day of bullshit. And yeah, it happened that I think the first 2 months I lost quite a lot. The third month I was break even, and the fourth month I think I was basically break even and slightly losing. And I was like, this is not, how do I do this? Like if I don't have any other sort of income, and now I'm break even through the entire year, because the way I see this is like I'm not just looking in short terms where I think like I just want to live from month to month. Like in Austria, they're living expensive, especially like long term, or like are fairly high or like somewhat reasonably high. So if I wanted to pursue this career, I wanted to make sure that I make enough money that after 10, like 5, 10, 15 years of playing, that I'm financially secure in order to do whatever I want, whatever this may be later on. So I didn't want to just go professional to make a little bit more than my original job. Actually, like when I started, I had the goal of making double the amount in the first year, and then I wouldn't go back. This was kind of, that money-wise the goal, although like I never really set myself money goals, but at that point I really had to do that in order to measure it kind of after that year, because my main goal was always and still is today to become basically the best poker player that I can personally be. And I remember then, yeah, this 4 months that they were over, and at that point I was like, all right, like after this educational year is over, I'm going back to my job. Like it's fine. Let's just enjoy the rest of the year and yeah, to try my best. And I was also highly debating, especially like in the second or third month to join some CFP, because I just couldn't really, help myself at that point. I figured that I'm playing okay. I was studying infinite amounts at that point, and I just didn't have any results to kind of, the results, they just didn't kind of reflect what I thought I was doing, in order like being somewhat reasonable, studying a lot, constantly improving, but still kept losing. That I considered joining like a CFP in order for them to help me. But then on the other hand, like most contracts are like 2 years, and then I have to give away like half of my profits for the most parts for like 2 years, and I just couldn't see myself paying that amount if my goals were met, because obviously it was to move high up in stakes and make more money, and that would be like an absurd amount of money that I had to give away. So I decided to against that, and I was like, yeah, whatever. I'm just gonna study the rest of the year and play the rest of the year as good as I can. And if things work out, then good. But at that point, I really had low expectations of this actually happening. And out of nowhere, it's like I didn't change anything at that point. I changed nothing. At some day, I just started running really well, and everything worked out. It was like crazy. Just like it was the button like switched back again, and I started winning a lot, like with all my values, started making a lot of money in this months. And then I remember back then, like the money goal that was met, including the losses that I had, were basically I was losing break even for the first 4 months, and then within like 3 months I had already hit the money goal that I wanted, basically doubling which was insane at that. Like I did not even think myself that making this much money in that amount was possible. Obviously, knowing that I just ran really well in this kind of period. So I would always put this into perspective, where if I have a month where I make an absurd amount of money, I'm not just, I'm like the biggest crusher there is out there. I always like look at the bigger picture, where as like, all right, what's the average that I make over a year or like 1.5 years or whatever.
Wow, it's amazing how things can turn around so quickly.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about poker. You never know when it's going to turn around. And when you're down in the dumps and it's months and months and months of losing, it just feels like it's never going to turn around. Like you're just doomed to fail. You just can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. But you just keep at it, you keep that persistence. And it's almost like life's testing you. Life's like, keep going, keep being persistent. There's lessons to be learned here. So for yourself, like obviously things did turn around quickly from that moment, but obviously it was like 3 or 4 months, probably felt like hell. What are some of the lessons you learned from that? Because I think it's probably, though it might not seem to the time, probably a blessing in disguise to start your poker career this way, because you went through a really tough patch. And then from there, it's give you this real kind of good perspective, like things can get tough, be aware of it. So what are some of the lessons you feel like you learned through that first 4 months?
Yeah, I think like this downswing was kind of obviously very tough, but a blessing if I look back now at that time, because every other downswing that came after that, even like the ones that the recent one that I have, where I was just running really bad on the high, like was playing, let's say that was at the end of last year, where I was playing quite a decent volume of 5K, and I was just running really, really bad. I lost the most amount of money that I have lost in my entire career, obviously because the stakes were so high. But in terms of buy-ins, it wasn't even close to the one that I had at the start. And looking back at the time, like if you try to be very reflective at that point, or very rational about it, it's like if you look back, you know that this is determined to happen. But then you also have to trust in your abilities, that everything you do is fine, and that it's gonna turn around eventually. So like I'm just gonna be down like a lot of money, but then there's gonna be months where I make infinite amounts, so it's gonna even out. And I think having made have made this experience when I started out was really great, because when it happens nowadays, even on the higher stakes that I play, like if you're being rational about how many buy-ins this is and don't just look at the net value of the money, yeah, I had kind of no problems dealing with losing a lot. I mean, no problems is a bit harsh, a bit stupid to say, because obviously when you're down a bunch, you're like, man, come on, this is a lot of money. And, you know, if I just didn't play like this last 2 months, I would be a lot richer than I am now. But, you know, to put this into perspective, it's still like, just in terms of variance, it's just nothing. And making this experience at the start was really nice, obviously, because nowadays, whatever happens, or like whenever there's like bad periods, I can just look back and I'm like, look, it started off bad, and we know like after a big enough sample, or like at least like let's put it like every time I'm on a downswing, like recently, I just look at my entire sample and I'm just convincing myself, look, I have X million hands with this kind of win rate, there's no way that I am losing in these games that I'm playing. And worst case, I just have to start, especially in downswings, like just start game selecting a bit more rather than just battling the boys on stars for for my main source of volume.
I've heard you mention perspective a number of times already in this conversation, and I can tell it's a skill of yours where you're able to put things in a context quite well, or quite easily, in terms of seeing the bigger picture. You're able to see that one downswing doesn't lead to a prolonged downswing. You can see, like, even zooming out, look at your full graph and seeing a downswing is just kind of X amount of buy-ins that you're losing at this moment, but doesn't reflect the long term. And I think this potentially helps you to stay confident during times where other players might freak out, because it feels like you're able to keep going and keep progressing even when things get tough. So I want to segue this into your game selection. And you mentioned that you spend a lot of your time playing 3 to 4-handed. I think you mentioned in our questionnaire you play with 60% of your volume against regs, which is very interesting in terms of a strategy, but it kind of fits for what you've already told us in terms of you want to be the best version of yourself you can be. So first of all, what are some of the benefits in terms of your progression of going for kind of playing good opponents strategy, and how do you maintain your confidence when you're going head to head with some of the better players?
Yeah, so like my main goal, or like the main reason why I do that, is in order to not start being lazy and constantly improve my game, basically. And what sometimes is a bit well, a bit difficult is there is like 2 to 3 tables where I play against really, really good players, 3 and 4-handed, just short-handed. And then I have 3 to 4 tables where it's like a huge spot plus 2 to 3 guys that only bum hunt and are fairly weak. And the games that are being played on these 2 tables is a completely different one. Like it's not even comparable. So sometimes it's a bit taxing to do that, because on the one hand you trying to execute a super solid strategy in order to not be exploitable and try to push very, very small edges, where on the other table you're basically getting gifted money by every single table of the player, and you're just it's kind of two extremes. So on the one hand you're just trying to be super solid, on the other hand you're on the table you're super out of line versus a lot of people, because you know that they have infinite leaks in their game. Yeah, and that's basically like why I keep, or like how to say, like in terms of strategy, is like the way I see this is you need to have this sort of, now like getting a bit deeper into it, the GTO kind of approach, where you need to have this is at least like how I see things, that you need to have a very good foundation, which is the GTO based game. So like you need to understand how a spot is supposed to be played in the equilibrium, in order to then make adjustments when you play against weaker player. And this is like, you start from learning against the best players, kind of. You learn this equilibrium strategy. You know how to play when you play against the bot, or like the solver, or in that case, humans that try to play a reasonable game. And from that point on, you can try to, in terms of like node locking or whatever, like however you want to do that, you can try to deviate in your strategy when you think, or you know that people have leaks, in terms of like, this guy is doing this too much, like what is the reasonable response or the deviation from your strategy.
Yeah, so creating a strong GTO framework almost builds the baseline of your game, and you build that stronger or better by playing strong opponents. That teaches you the kind of fundamentals at a higher level, and then from there that allows you to exploit the players who are not playing at that standard or making mistakes around that. So in terms of, I want to double down on the question around confidence. How do you keep your confidence high when you're playing tough opponents? Let's say it's a different player pool. Let's say you're moving to stakes. We're going to talk about your rise for the stakes very quickly. Yeah. Let's say you're playing a tough player pool. It's maybe 5Ks or 10Ks. It's really tough players, some of the best players in the world, and you're going to sit against those 3 or 4-handed and battle it out for a period of time. How do you keep your confidence, or how do you go into those games mindset-wise so you don't get obliterated mindset-wise?
Yeah, so I think when I get into those games, like usually I'm well prepared. When I know that I play only regs, I look at the database that is available for me in order to find out how they think about the game or how they approach the game. Because a good player, like all the good players, do not have the exact same approach. So like everyone sees things a bit differently. And it's basically my job prior to find out whether this guy thinks that way and that guy thinks that way, and then find solutions in order to at least keep up with their strategies, so to speak. So this is kind of like when I join into a game. So either I have this learning process of someone beating me, and then like he deserves my money basically if he has a better strategy than mine, or I am prepared enough, or like I am so convinced that my capability of playing against these guys would at least break me even, that I can still play. Like I never get into a game and I'm either, let's put it like that, I either know that there's a chance of me being slightly losing in whatever lineup that might be. And when I join this game, I am probably conscious that this could be the case, but that's still fine for me. I'm just trying to play to the best of my ability, knowing that there could be a scenario where I'm losing here. But for the most part, I'm just fairly confident that I'm at least not losing in most of the lineups that I play.
Yeah, it's a very interesting mindset. I think it allows you to do one of two things: either go in there with a learning mindset that you're going to learn and improve, or you're going to win. It's like learn or win kind of approach. But also like you have high confidence that even if you're losing, there's lessons here. There's lessons to be learned here.
Exactly.
I think this is a good, like, was a great mindset. And a lot of players struggle with this because they almost like challenge themselves to always be in a lineup they can win. And when they're not winning, all of a sudden it really challenges their ego, their identity. For example, for you to go into a game where you're potentially a losing player, it sounds like that's quite easy for you. It's like, all right, cool. I'll learn some lessons off some great players. Let's play it. But for some players, that would be crippling. They'd be like, oh, I might not be as good as these. Nah, I'll avoid those games. So I'm interested to know your approach to risk taking and how this has impacted your career. So I can say from a higher level, your kind of main objective is to be the best player you can be. And it's not money oriented. It's not so much externals. It's more an internal pursuit of being better, which leads you to play tougher lineups than other players might do. So yeah, when you take on risks, or like say you move with buy-ins, or you put some of your bankroll on the line, how do you approach taking risks, and what are some of the things that's impacted you?
Yeah, so I mean, to begin with, this is probably an important aspect of why I can do the things that I do. That's like that I'm probably a huge bankroll nit compared to like other guys. So if I'm playing these rag battles, I have at least 100 buy-ins, most of the times more. So I don't really bother with kind of variance. And if, as I stated earlier, if I'm like on a sick downswing, there might be days where I would just, skip the reg battles just because I've kept losing and I just don't need to donate additional money, especially like on the downswing when you might not be playing your A+ game, more like A- game or B game. And I think I'm taking, in terms of the variance, I'm just trying to be aware of the fact that when I play these games, there's going to be 40, 50 buy-ins, 60 buy-in swings that are completely normal, and I'm willing to lose that or win that or break even or whatever, and that's fine for me. I think it would be fairly unreasonable if you were playing these kind of games with a bankroll management that would not even cover the variance that could possibly hit you. I think even people are not aware of how much variance there, or like a lot of people are not aware of how much variance there is in those games where you're either break even, 1 BB winning, half a BB winning, even 2 BB winning. Like if you're playing three-handed, like stacks are just flying around basically, and you could potentially lose quite a lot. So I think that you having a very reasonable bankroll in order to do that is key, because I can see myself if I get, if I lose a big part of my bankroll doing that, and then I would have to move down, I would feel mentally very bad about what I did and about the entire situation. And I think this could stress me out even more. So my policy is kind of at least 100 buy-ins if like there is no recreational on the table. And even with like recreations on the table, I still tend to keep it to 100 buy-ins, because I just don't want to deal with the fact that I just lost 20% of my bankroll. Like it's kind of, even though this might not be the highest EV in terms of the upside, so let's say I could potentially sometimes hop into 10K games more often, even shot like a 20K game if it's like really good. But I just don't want to deal with like all the emotional stress at this point when I'm making like a very reasonable amount of money, and my main goal is to become like the best possible player rather than making the most amount of money at that time.
When we first jumped on this call today, I did not think I would hear you say that you're a bankroll nit, how fast you've moved up stakes and the kind of stakes you're playing so quickly. I thought if anything, you would have been very aggressive, like with your bankroll and taking shots on like a low bankroll. So it's really interesting to hear that you've had this very sensible, conservative approach, but still moved super quick, like way quicker than almost anyone else we spoke to. So I like the mindset. So basically you were saying you were almost conditioning yourself that you could go on a 30 or 40 buy-in swing before you jumped up stakes. I think that's very important because you're acknowledging variance, regardless if your win rate's small or you're a slightly losing player. It's part of the games, and it's going to happen sometimes. So if you're not willing to lose 30, 40 buy-ins, don't take that shot right now. Bump in a bit more, play the stakes you're playing. It's not the right opportunity right now. So I think that's a really good kind of level out to make sure, okay, am I ready to move up? Yes, no, yes or no? Can I tolerate losing 40 buy-ins? Yes, okay, I'm ready. Other players have a different approach. I've spoke with many players who do this kind of aggressive shot taking where they'll have a 5 or 10 buy-in shot take at the higher stakes. If they lose that, move back down. Then 5 or 10 buy-ins, lose it, move back down. The challenge with that is you're constantly going between stakes and you're almost like very results orientated because you need a good start. If you don't get a good start, back down. Don't get a good start, back down. Whereas your approach allows you to play a lot of volume at those stakes. I'm guessing losing 30, 40 buy-ins, like if you're playing those games, it could take a while, even with some bad variance. So you get a sample size built up, but also you're in a comfortable position bankroll-wise that you don't need to panic. You don't need to worry about, do I get good results? And for you, because your mindset and your overall approach is to get better, if you're breaking even in a tougher player pool, you're probably loving it. You're like, oh, great, this is awesome free training against these great guys.
Yeah, that's true. Also, what I think, something to add on that is, I think it's just, I mean, I guess some people can do that. I personally couldn't do that myself, taking a shot with 20, 30 buy-ins, for example. Let's say I wanted to join a 10K game and I only had 50 buy-ins. I just couldn't justify myself putting me into the game because I know myself that I would not make the best possible decision in every possible situation, because there's the money that's at stake just means so much to me in that moment, and it's so important at that point that I would probably not be able to play my A game. And this is basically my main criteria of playing. Like, if I know I'm getting in there, I don't care about, let's say I play like 5K game, 2, 3, 5K tables, and I know if I lose 10 buy-ins, it's kind of whatever, like that's fine. That you're in the right mindsets to play these kind of games. At least this is how I approach the game. Because I remember back then when I started playing 5K, I think it was in the first couple of sessions, I was in spots like in freebet pots where I just had to a decent bluff on the river, and I was like, yeah, whatever, let's put it in and go down with the ship. Got snapped off by the nuts, and I'm like, yeah, that's 10K for you. Let's hope that we get aces next hand. This is kind of how I think about it in that moment, and I don't think you can do that if you take these shots aggressively. Also, although I think that in some game, when games are so good that the upsides are way bigger than the downsides, it would make sense to shot take aggressively.
Yeah, I like that because basically you're acknowledging that it's not as simple as just like playing the buy-in. There's an emotional impact of your decision making based on how much money is on the line. And although you might try to separate yourself from that, if bankroll considerations are a big deal to you, or it's somewhat risking your bankroll to a degree, it's very hard to just play your best poker, to make that kind of a ballsy play on the river and bluff off a stack in a higher buy-in, and you'll find yourself making deviations in your normal game, which could be costly. So like you said, yeah, like unless the opportunity is very good, and it's a very good kind of game selection opportunity to play higher, yeah, it's going to create challenges with that kind of small bankroll approach. So yeah, I think your approach is, yeah, spot on, to be honest. All right, I want to ask about the speed of your rise through the ranks. So it's kind of debated like how quick you could rise to high stakes, and obviously we all have 24 hours in the day, so it's very hard to like obviously get more time. So for you to rise so quickly, you've obviously done a lot of things very well. You've always been very effective with your time. Just the way you spoke about getting into solvers, I can tell like as soon as you found out how effective they were, you went really deep into how to use them effectively. So I'm really interested to for you to walk us through a day in the life of you going when you're professional and you're moving up stakes. Maybe like in your kind of peak progression years when you're moving up quickly. Talk us through like how you would spend your time and how you were optimizing your studying in order to get better day to day.
Yeah, so I mean, probably have to add that I was very lucky with like the people that I connected with throughout my career, because like everyone that I got involved with in terms of studying and working together, I think they helped me quite a lot in terms of whether it's like some technical stuff in bio, how to run scripts, how to run reports, how to interpret that stuff, doing pre-flop sims and so on. I was very lucky to probably meet the right people at the right time to or most of the times just get, that thing that I needed at that point. And then additionally, I would just assume that I also ran really well through that time, because as you said, like I'm not aggressively shot taking, and I just moved up in stakes rather quickly. Although, to be fair, this was never my kind of the goal that I had to move up that quickly. It just happened basically, like I was just playing day after day, and then I saw my bankroll rising. I'm like, okay, like now it's time to take some shots on that stake, and just a progress that happened. And I guess in the peak the peak progress time, the way a day looked like was a lot of poker for me. It was usually that I was playing a session in the morning. Like this is this is still nowadays how my schedule looks like, that I always play in the morning, that my main time where I play is the morning time till maybe afternoon. Then I had a break where I either went to the gym, did some sports, had some food, just some free time. And then at that time, I was basically with my study partner back then having this routine of just playing either the GTO trainer, just looking at aggregated reports of something, just trying to, or having a structured way of getting through spot by spot in order to have a strategical understanding of how things are being played. And this is what we continuously do, it probably 5 to 6 days per week, where we might have an average of 3 to 4 hours of studying per day in a week. And that might not have been enough at that time, because most of the times, if I had nothing to do in the evening, I played another session for 2 or 3 hours. So I think at the peak time, I might have spent at least 60 to 70 hours with poker related stuff per week.
Yeah, nice, hardcore. So you mentioned a structured way to learn in spots. And I think this is speaking with a lot of players who are trying to study poker and get better. They often feel like they're kind of dragged around by lots of things to work on, and they don't have that structured approach. So without sharing all your secrets, how do you go around structuring your studying? So it sounds like you and your study partner had a real almost curriculum of things you're going through in terms of how to understand spots better, how to apply them. Did you, first of all, what made you think to go that approach to studying, and how did you and your friends create a structure to studying poker?
Yeah, so we shared a very similar philosophy, which was trying to have a very simple but good game tree that we could execute, not using 4 sizes every street where you're already on the turn, you don't know what the fuck is going on. So what we've done is we categorized basically boards that we think could be strategically similar, and then made our customized game trees for this board and just solved every single board for this category. And what we've done is we did this for all the spots that we found was relevant, and then just started working on spot after spot after spot. So we probably had a week where we said we now do the king high boards. We just wanted to have a general assumption or a general knowledge of how much is the c-betting here, how much is the defending part, and so on, just to have an approximate guess. And obviously back then we were really kind of nerdy about that stuff, because what we did, we were not playing spots in the solver, we were playing filtered nodes. So at one day we would just play 2 hours of c-betting a board. The other day we would play 2 hours of defending versus the c-bet. Next day we would play the turn strategies and so on. This was basically how we approached spots. So we probably got maybe one strategic, let's say 1 bucket per week. And we've been doing this for probably an entire year and never got finished with all the spots that we wanted, because it was so detailed. And back then we also had this approach that, we tried to mimic what the solver does, not understanding where a lot of the EV really came from. Thinking that, the GTO solution is the best possible solution, which nowadays I would disagree in a lot of cases. But yeah, this is basically how we did. So we were we were very detailed about what we did and very precise, which ended up in probably so much information that 2 months later, you probably forgot half of the stuff that you did on the spot 2 months prior, because there was just so much data and information processed, it was impossible. But I think the benefit was the spots that you were working through that precisely. You had a really good understanding of how this spot is supposed to be played. Obviously, you can't recall every single combo and so on, but you get the idea of what does your CBNA strategy looks like, how does your value look like, what is best bluffs, and so on.
Yeah, so it sounds like you, first of all, simplified the game tree, created spots where you thought would come up frequently, or simplified boards. And then you tried to create like a plan you could execute, a strategy you could execute well. And then you almost like really into the details of playing that spot over and over and over after repetition. So you understood the nuances of that spot. So yeah, it sounds like a very detailed breakdown of playing them. Like you said, like obviously you might now go more into understand the solvers rather than trying to replicate them. But that time, I'm sure that kind of repetition of going that deep, that detailed on spots still now, it's probably, oh yeah, I'm glad we did that kind of learning curve, because now we've spent a year going super deep on all these spots. We understand so much about the nuances of the game that other players might not have gone deep on. Because I think a lot of players skim a lot. They skim the surface. They don't go that depth. For you, watching one C-bet spot over and over for 2 hours every day, I just imagine like the repetition of that, knowing that that's all you're going to do today. Just C-bet, C-bet, C-bet. So it shows like, kind of a detailed mindset, but also a wanting to be able to execute well. I'm guessing this was coming from a need to want to learn, execute the strategy at a high level.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned during your League of Legends day that at some point you were sleeping, I think you said 4 to 5 hours, and almost burning out. I'm wondering, when you approach poker, I think you're probably in your mid-20s, obviously when you're late 20s, when you're kind of pursuing poker, maybe you've learned some lessons by then. But how did you approach poker with some balance so that you didn't burn out? Because for you, obviously, you move to stakes very quickly. And I think often there's a tendency for players to almost push it too hard and almost like, hit that kind of burnout point by not sleeping, by basically not having that life balance. So for yourself, is there anything you've done to kind of create some balance for yourself as you've been working really hard, pushing these 70-hour weeks to pursue your poker goals?
Yeah, so at the start, I was probably investing a lot of time, but I also had a lot of free time, especially at that point where I started playing professionally, because there was nothing else to do. What I really try to incorporate is always having sports and like a gym routine, in order to have some sort of balance in life, not only just spending the entire day in front of a computer. And I also still play video games occasionally because I just enjoy that. And something that probably sums this up perfectly is, throughout this career, there was like a very brief moment where me and my study partner back then were thinking that cash, with like all the future, with like all the RTA, the liquidity problems and stuff like that, might be a bit problematic. And we saw opportunity in MTTs and started doing the same thing with MTTs, just solving the spots and trying to learn whatever and trying to switch to MTTs. And at that time, I think it was like during Scoop, I picked off two. I wanted to grind the entire Scoop as good as I could. 2 weeks in, I had to stop, because like I was playing from afternoon or evening till like 5 or 6 in the morning every day, and I just felt like crap. Like the sleep was bad, my health situation was probably like not bad, but I just didn't feel like super healthy and fit when I woke up. And I was like, nah, this is not for me. I can't do that. And we quickly were throwing this out of the window because this lifestyle was just not sustainable. And this is also why nowadays, or like probably the last 1.5 years to 2 years, like my main schedule is just playing. I'm waking up, getting ready to play, setting everything up. So like probably an hour after I wake up, I start my session. I don't really set an alarm, like, because usually I just wake up between 8 and 10, depending on when to go to sleep, and I don't have that strict schedule, so to speak. So whenever I wake up, I prepare myself to grind, then grind X amount of hours till the games are bad or I decide to leave. Usually then either have food, go to the gym, come back, and then have like either a study session, whatever is planned on the afternoon, or meet some friends, do some different sports, or play some video games. So I'm trying to have like a very balanced lifestyle where I don't invest every single free moment into poker anymore at this point. And then occasionally, if I really don't have anything planned and I don't feel like playing video games, I might play another session in the evening, but this probably happens maybe like 4 to 5 times per month. even though this might not be the highest EV in terms of like how the action is, as long as I make a decent amount of money doing this while maintaining this lifestyle, I'd rather sacrifice whatever win rate this might be in order to live a somewhat balanced life and feel good about it.
Yeah, and also like the long-term sustainability. For you, the goal is to be as good as you can be, the best version of yourself, and that's going to be a long progression. So for you don't want to like cap out in 1 year and burn yourself out. You want to be playing 2 years, 5 years, 10 years in the future. So it's almost this kind of slow and steady. I say slow and steady, you're doing 70-hour weeks. That's pretty hard to go for some, but it's very thought out in terms of the balance you have in your days, going to the gym, playing the morning schedule, going to bed in the evenings and not like grinding for the night time. I'm sure occasionally you'll stay up later than you want to. But yeah, I think for yourself, you can create that nice balance where from the outside, you're working very hard, but also for yourself, you're like, I can do this every day. I'm sustainable here. This is not, this is good for me. So yeah, really good. You found that kind of groove for yourself. It looks like that MTT experience maybe showed you, this is how not to do it for you personally. Obviously, shout out to all the MTT grinders out there who grind crazy hours until 4 a.m. And yeah, I've got to get up and do it all again. But yeah, for yourself, the morning schedule sounds like it works really well. All right, I want to transition into, you mentioned that you've always found the right people at the right time, which I think is very interesting to know. Who's had a big impact on your career? So obviously the last 3 years, you've rose up the stakes very quickly. Who've been some like role models? You mentioned study partners, any coaches, or a bit of inspired you to progress at the speed you have? Anyone who comes to mind?
I mean, there's like, apart from my study partners that I still study with nowadays, I never had a coach or someone that I, so to speak, look up to. Obviously, I was railing, the high stakes games every now and then and was very interested in, and everyone like knows the likes of Renes, and would be great to be in his shoes at some point, if that, but that's like not the goal for me. So like, this is not the thing that I want to achieve. I mean, it would be great if that happens, but or trying to stay humble and realistic. Yeah, so I didn't really have like role model specifically, but I think the guys that I connected with throughout my career just basically boosted my kind of capability of playing poker. And basically, I think the way that I approach it and the mindset that I have, where when I see someone else, or like when I connect with someone else and I discuss with someone else and this guy has a different opinion, like there's a lot of guys that are so set with what they think and they are so convinced about what they are right, which in poker is most of the times just completely wrong. Every time someone gave a different opinion and we were having a study session, there's probably like that day, if I'm at the gym, I might think about what he said maybe like 1 hour through. Like I'm just trying to kind of work out like his approach and how he got to the point, and like understanding his position, and then trying to incorporate that stuff that makes sense into my game. I think boosted basically, or like made my development way quicker than it could have been without, or on myself, or certainly would have been without if I was working on it with myself.
Yeah, I think the best learners who absorb the most are often very open-minded, and they take on other people's opinions and they try to incorporate them into their way of thinking. Whereas most people, in honesty, are quite closed-minded. They will have a viewpoint and they'll just try to defend that viewpoint. It sounds like for yourself, you've had this kind of ability to be very confident in your game. The way you spoke, I can tell you, if someone's chatting strategy with you, you're going to have a very confident line of what you think, but at the same time you're open-minded. You can take in other interpretations of strategy, other people's perspectives, and you think them through. Like you said, being at the gym, thinking over what somebody else said for an hour and how you can think like them. That's showing that you're trying to absorb their knowledge, and you're very open-minded to that, which is a superpower when it comes to learning.
Yeah, especially to poker, because at the end of the day, nobody knows anything about the game really. Like everyone is just sitting there clicking buttons. It's just you have to be less of a button clicker than the other guy, and you're basically winning.
How to win a poker: become less of a button clicker than your opponent.
You're right. That's essentially what it is about.
Yeah, you mentioned you had a study partner who you studied with for a year, and this seems like a very beneficial relationship both ways. And I'm thinking a lot of players listen to this will be like, oh, I wish I had a player or someone I could study with consistently, who holds me accountable, who I can chat strategy with. Was there any kind of what were the pros and cons of that? So if you guys are meeting up most days, talking strategy, what were some of the benefits of having a regular study partner? And was there any kind of conflicts in terms of you wanted to study different things, maybe disagreeing on topics and finding it hard to come to certain lines of strategy?
No, I mean, this probably also where I was pretty lucky is that I really connected with most people that are very like-minded, which means that they're very open-minded. So there always have been open discussion, but there's never been any sort of arguments about anything. So this is basically what I experience is like the best players that I connected with, everyone knows that they know nothing about the game in terms of like, they just, the game is so complex, it's impossible to have it figured out. It's impossible to know everything about every single spot. And the best players that I connected with is like when we do a study session, like I'm sitting here and like, okay, maybe we do this, maybe we do this. And the other guy's like, I have no clue. Maybe this is good. Maybe this is good. And what I often see with people that are playing on like lower stakes or having discussions, especially in some sort of communities and discords, they have so strong opinions about some stuff when, I'm playing 10 times the stakes that they do, or even higher. And I'm sitting here, dude, like not even I, or like even the guys that I studied with or myself could not make such a strong opinion about the spot because it's not so clear. And these guys just sitting there saying, yeah, this is that, or this is that. And I think this is where connecting obviously helps, but you have to be very open-minded and connect with people that actually, share that kind of attitude. Because if you're working with someone that always says, man, look at this guy's so bad, and he did this, and your play was super bad because this guy never bluffs you, whatever it might be. Like if it's just so strong opinions that you cannot argue against because this guy is so convinced like he's not gonna help you improve, and you're just not gonna progress any further. So I think connecting with the right people at the right time, and I think this is, you have to be lucky on the one hand. On the other hand, though, you probably contribute yourself a little bit towards that. So if you're very open-minded towards the other guy, I think he's way more likely to open his mind up too and be very open about spots and discussions. Whereas if you go in there and like, man, this was so terrible, like how can you do this, and this was very bad, and here you made a mistake, probably the response is not going to be super great, even when someone might be more of an open-minded person.
Yeah, I think like-minded people attract other like-minded people. And if you've got that kind of closed-minded view where you're kind of almost stressing your way of playing, you're complaining about spots, and you do have a conversation with another player like yourself, very quickly you'll be like, we don't align, this isn't going to work out, but we have one chat together, and then the relationship kind of fizzles out. Whereas you've been able to find players who have been very open-minded like yourself. And you mentioned the best players know they know nothing. It's very interesting. Like it's as I look at experts in most fields, it's generally the experts at the very highest level who are willing to go, there's so much we don't know. We're just trying to figure it out. We're just trying to do the best we can with the information we have, but there's still a lot of unknowns. And I think having that kind of beginner's mindset allows you to keep learning, keeps that novelty. And yeah, it's amazing how many players are like in the lower stakes who think they figured it out, who will be telling them, oh, you do this, you do that. And then the guys in the higher stakes who actually figured a lot out, they're like, oh, we don't really know. We're just trying, we think this might be effective, but we're open to the ideas. It's just such an interesting kind of thing to think about, where the best guys having conversations are like, we don't know. And then the lower guys are like really blunt on their points. So yeah, really interesting. Rene, how about yourself? You've obviously studied with a lot of players and you're a very open-minded guy. How do you feel like, kind of conversing with players who are open-minded helps to progress your thinking?
I mean, I've been in poker a long time, and I think that's a quality that you need to have, because else you're not in poker for a long time. I think people who are very close-minded, they probably, they were close-minded. They weren't open to new strategies, and they couldn't beat the games anymore at some point. Throughout my career, like, there were various phases where I was very ahead of the curve. Like the way Josef said, I made less mistakes than the amount of mistakes they made, right? I was also shit, but I was less shit than them. And then there was maybe a year in my career where I kind of slipped off and was making more mistakes than they were making. So that doesn't mean that they were gods. They were still making a lot of mistakes, but I was just making a bit more mistakes than them. So I think then this is just kind of natural in your poker career. I'm very curious though. Why do you think it is that players do that, Adam? That they're so close-minded? Is it that they cannot, like, accepting the fact that they don't know will make them insecure?
I think it's ego, and we hold on to certainty. So one of the kind of human drives is to have certainty, to know what is predictable and what's coming next. So if we have a lot of knowledge and we can predict things, it gives us a level of certainty and security that allows us to feel confident in what we're doing. If we remove that and we go, I don't actually know, that creates this whole uncertainty that we don't like. Humans don't like uncertainty. So we try to create boxes, like almost like box in some certainty if we can, and that blocks us from learning. So the ego creates these constructs and tries to create this kind of closed identity, but also we try to kind of close off anything that's uncertain and try to create some boundaries that allow us to predict the future. So we can make better decisions. So it's very brave to when someone to not know. Like, but you play poker for a living, you guys. It's very brave to go, I don't actually know how to play the spot. It's like, really, you're gonna play a spot for a lot of money here. Are you sure you don't know? It's like very. Oh yeah, it's a typical like kind of mindset a lot of people embody, especially like lower stakes guys, because they would rather have a lot of confidence in a strategy and double down on that, and then they can act from that. So yes, I think those are the main variables.
Yeah, I've definitely been through phases where you feel that response like, oh shit, actually there's still so many things that I don't know, and that you lean towards the side of, okay, well then I guess I have to study my ass off, look to every spot, try to figure everything out, which is, it's just impossible. Like Joseph already said, the game is so complex. And it's mainly in, I would say, sort of surrendering and accepting the fact that you don't know, but luckily no one knows. That's like, I think where like you can find some sort of peace, if that's the right word. I was listening carefully to your conversation. I thought one thing that was interesting is that when you said that I changed nothing, but then I suddenly went into an upswing. That was at the moment that you were considering quitting, but throughout when you said that, it was quite interesting because I thought actually something did change, or at least listening to you saying it, because you were saying it like I sort of already accepted that, okay, I'm going back to my job. There was a certain acceptance, I think. Maybe, this maybe had a small part. Obviously, wrong good happens. But that it's also like, yeah, well, I'll just go back to my job. And that I think relieves a lot of the pressure, so to speak. I don't know if you can. This was just something that I heard.
I mean, that could certainly be the case. That I at some point where I basically had the chances of me being a professional poker player were lower than going back to the job. That I kind of was, a bit of relieved. Where in terms of I could just play a bit more freely than if I was playing
like if it works out,
to win.
It works out. If it doesn't, fine.
Right, yeah.
Whereas, I can imagine your situation. You're really forced. Okay, I have to make this. That can put a certain pressure that can maybe, in certain decisions show up. Obviously, it might be a small part, but just something interesting.
Yeah, I think that could certainly play the role in
that. You also talked. You guys also discussed like battling a lot. I've played, I don't know how many hands, a lot of battles in my life as well. You said a lot of good things. I think aligning expectations is very important. Not that if you lose 10 buy-ins, you're like, what the fuck is going on? I thought I was ahead. No, that you realize this is just part of the swings. But I think also you mentioned going in studied. And this was also actually, I think, something that George mentioned in the podcast, like knowing where the EV comes from. Obviously, knowing like, where do my opponents have certain leaks? Where is the money flowing to me? That gives you a certain confidence regardless of the result. But also in terms of preparing yourself for what is going to happen. Like you said, some people play different strategies. It cannot really be that you play a battle versus guys who you're going to play against a lot, and then they suddenly do a lot of stuff, and they're like, oh, I didn't see this coming. Like, you understand? If you play a battle, you need to kind of know, like, okay, these guys have these tendencies. They play these type of strategies. I need to be prepared for that. Like, so if you're too often in a battle against a guy, like, oh, I didn't see that coming. Oh, I didn't see that coming. You might feel, I think you leave more room to doubt yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the only guy that probably triggers this kind of emotion is Stefan, because like he's all over the place.
But to be fair, every day he does something different, which is actually very, very cool about poker, because like you can come up with various strategies that have similar EV. It's always like how you execute your strategy will kind of determine your EV. So you can actually say, okay, one day I'm going to show up, play this strategy, and the next day I'll show up, play the other strategy. And then your opponent's like, huh?
Yeah, right.
I thought I had to figure it out, right? This is probably, a sort of element of surprise that I think Stefan also sees a lot of value in, and just every day show up and like, okay, let's see how they react to this.
Yeah, he's playing future poker. It's like in chess, you just have different openings, And then you just you wake up and you're like, this day I played this strategy, this day like he's prepared 6 different openings, and that's how he plays.
Yeah, that's next level. I think it was Muniz who said, "Listen, I studied I studied Stefan 5 times, and then every time I thought I had to figure out, and he just started to do something completely different."
Yeah, it's rough.
That is indeed very rough. Another very good point that you made that made me remember the podcast we did with Jared, man, where he said the conclusion was have more money, all problems solved. That's kind of also the vibe that I got. Yeah, just have a bigger bankroll, no stress, you know.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
obviously,
that's true.
like, how can you get a bigger bankroll? And then Adam indeed assumed like, oh, you probably were aggressive in shots, but then you actually said, no, I'm a big bankroll net. So then probably one of your skills was volume, and you did say that when you explained like your journey, right? You managed to be very consistent in putting in the volume.
Yeah, I was
This
just
is probably also like, yeah,
showing up basically every single day where I could. It was like, and until today I still enjoy just getting up and battling and grinding it out every single day. Although I have to say that nowadays where the games are, because back of the day 200 zoom was always running it was not a big deal to find a lot of action on 500 on like GGE and stars and like different sites. If you play almost exclusively 1k plus, especially in mornings, it might be a bit rough even with the GG current situation to find a lot of games. So therefore maybe nowadays, like this month and this month specifically, like the volume might be low. But in general, I still show up every day and probably play quite a reasonable amount of volume compared to the other guys that are playing, or like most other guys that play in the stakes that I play.
yes, this is very important also for the audiences. And if you struggle putting in volume, it's definitely worth trying to figure out why that is. And maybe some people say, yeah, just because I'm lazy, but figure out, go a bit deeper. Okay, then why are you lazy? Like, why you're trying to prevent the play? Maybe like some sort of self-sabotage, contact Adam, maybe he can help you.
I mean, yeah, I probably have the benefit of, seeing for like 5 to 6 years what the 9 to 5 top job looks like and the perspective. So I'm very grateful for every single day that I can spend grinding and having this sort of lifestyle while having complete financial freedom. It's just a blessing to have. And I guess if you started with poker and you never really had a long-term normal job, so to say, I guess you can appreciate it. You cannot really appreciate it as much as I can right now.
I think also putting in a lot of volume, you probably also put in a lot of volume in League of Legends.
Yeah, I mean that was just insane. Like
Insane.
I was read on. I'd rather not talk about how much I played, but it was
maybe
too
it has
much.
helped you.
Yeah, it has helped me improve my League of Legends game, but I think that was the only good thing about putting in so much volume there.
I was curious, like when working through the ranks, through each stakes, which jump in stakes did you find the hardest?
Probably 500 to 1k, to be honest. I think, let's say 50, 100 zoom is, I mean, that's a pretty long time ago, but I would assume that these stakes are very similarly in terms of how people play. I think nowadays 200 zoom is a bit more tough because there is 500 zoom almost never running. So this is like the highest zoom stake and the rake is fairly high. But I think the biggest difference, especially talking about stars, for example, is the jump from 100 from 500 to 1k, and then 1k and above is also another like huge step. So like there's a lot of people that bum hunt 1k and play 1k, but the guys or like the professionals that usually show up on 2k plus on stars are all super solid, really really good, whereas on 500 you still have a lot of mum hunters that basically play all stakes from 500 to 100 just trying to make sure to get into good games, and these guys are sort of filtered out on 1k and then 2k to another step. And I think these kind of steps were probably the ones where, or still nowadays, I think that the biggest differences is obviously I can't tell the difference to 5k and then high stakes nosebleeds is going to be still insane, I could imagine. But in those games, I usually only play, or like, let's say I play 5K or 10K, that there's only games that I play with recreational. So usually there's also other guys that bump hunt that are a little bit weaker, and then it's barely like a lineup, whereas there's just one slightly using recreationals and then 4 other really good players. So usually you have a reasonable table on these kind of stakes.
Yeah, I would agree. Like 500 NL is definitely a completely different level on average than, for example, 1K. And then indeed you have a lot of guys that just play like 2K plus. So that, let's say they grind 2K to 10K. And those guys you don't really see on 1K. Nowadays, you have a bit more, I think, 1K to 5K, 1K to 10K, simply because there's a bit less action than, for example, in the past. And yeah, 1K is a bit of a mixed stake, but definitely already way tougher than 500. What was it about your game that you needed to develop in order to beat the new competition?
That's
Do you maybe still recall something like, oh yeah,
I mean, that's a basically, I think the biggest problem was every time I moved up in stakes, I gave way too much credit to the guys that I played against. And I think as soon as I dropped doing so and actually figured out that these guys are also humans with leaks, this is where, you know, I started doing well on those stakes. Because it was really didn't matter when I moved up from 200 to 500. I thought these guys were really good, and now they're gonna crush me. When I moved up to 1K, I thought these guys were really good. They're gonna crush me. Same thing with 2K and 5K as well. Turns out, even some guys that I considered, you know, legends of the game, I looked through the game, and nowadays I think it's fairly weak, and they're just there to collect the juice from the VIPs that are joining. So I think in terms of how I changed my game, or like my foundation or the game that I played was always solid. I was just, you know, giving the guys that were playing in the higher stakes too much credit, and then just punted by doing actions that I now know are very bad. And back then I thought these guys are just gods and play every spot perfectly. So I need to try to bluff catch in all the single spots. I need to have bluffs in every single spot too. And I think that at the start would cost me a lot of win rate. And as soon as I figured out that these guys are just humans with leaks, everything basically started working normally, and the results were okay-ish.
Yeah, it's funny when we take a shot, we suddenly feel like we have to do something different or feel something special, while the whole reason you put yourself in a position to get to, you know, to take that shot was because you were playing very good. So why do we suddenly want to play different when, you know, when we kind of deserved to move up? No, this is definitely something that I've heard, that we've heard come back many times throughout the pod, like giving too much credit to your opponent when moving up as a very big league. You mentioned you worked your way through the Zoom pool. I'm curious, why do you think a lot of players stay stuck at like 50, 100, or 200 Zoom? Probably this is also one of the reasons, right? They give too much credit, or they think the stake one above is tougher than it actually is.
Yeah, I think honestly the main reason why I think people are stuck is ego / entitlement, kind of. And this, with that I mean that a lot of those players are playing to win and not in order to play a good strategy or good, you know, a good poker. This is the thing where it starts. And then I oftentimes see, I'm still like observing some communities where the talk strat is like, when there's a hand, like a questionable hand being posted, or like there's threat talk about the hand, I think first 90% of the comments is just how bad the other guys are, how bad these guys are, how bad this action is, how bad whatever this is. And they're just focusing, like they're putting so much energy into something that is not related with them. If they would just spend all this time that they're thinking about how bad these players are, about themselves, and how they could change their strategy in order to win against that, I mean, everyone would just move up way quicker. And I think this is a big part of them being stuck. And then what I also think with ego is that I think a lot of people, although they're on lower stakes, they're still bad, and they're not too good at the game. They still think that they deserve much more than the other guys they're playing because they perceive them to be better. And they are trying to kind of win every pot because they feel entitled to win, although they, you know, there's just spots where or like in poker, losing is part of the game. You know, let's say a fold, like oftentimes folding is higher in EV than calling. You know, like I think a lot of people do not understand that, for example.
Yeah, or giving up.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
there's just
sometimes losing the hand is higher EV than trying to win the hand.
exactly, that sums it up. Like, you know, losing is higher EV than doing any other action, whatever the losing action might be. And I don't think that people do understand or do kind of how do I say are satisfied with that. And it does not really stop at that point, because oftentimes I see people when they talk about bluff catch spots or whatever it might be, and they lost the stack, what they're doing is they're looking into the solver just to get some sort of justification of what they did, instead of actually thinking about the spot. Because oftentimes when you look at river spots in solvers, like the ranges that both players have do not even look close to what in reality the ranges might look like. So they're making a huge punt in reality, which is like a break-even call in theory, and they're like, whatever, like, you know, I rolled a 10 here, and this is like I have to call it half of the time, so I'm even folding probably more than the solver should do. Like, how bad can this be? And I play this game perfectly, and this guy, you know, he just never has a bluff. Like, what can I do? And they're just thinking. This comes back to the open-minded and like the this kind of the whole approach where they, if they would just flip it around and think about, all right, this guy, when he looks on these entire ranges, maybe this combo was already removed on flops and turns, and he would never find this bluff. Maybe just, you know, node lock this kind of scenario to see what is the logical answer for me to do that in that spot, instead of just satisfying yourself looking at the Pio solution, and kind of convincing yourself that you did everything well in that spot.
So basically what you're also saying is that ego prevents them actually from looking at themselves, because the ego might not like what it will find in the reality once the ego.
Yeah. I think so too.
That makes a lot of sense. I also heard once that it's very hard to let go of doing something that you've been doing for a long time, because that requires a certain admitting to yourself that for a long time you've been doing it the wrong way. And we often prefer to just, you know, don't admit we did it wrong and just continue and just, you know, crash or go down with the ship, instead of like admitting like, hey, wait, what I was maybe now doing is maybe suboptimal. Maybe I should change that.
Yeah. And I think the second thing is, I mean, I don't know how to describe that, but poker is in a sense such a stupid game that you have to be the least human that you can possibly be.
I'm trying to follow. Go on.
So the human brain when it comes to poker is very stupid. You know, like you just a lot of the things are very unintuitive and not logical. So what I mean with that, and I experienced this coaching some like 102 and L players. They came up to me with the hand, and they were telling me in this spot, and like in spots where it's like completely wide, and I would just throw in my half of my stack with like whatever bluff catcher I have, and they're like, nah, we thought you like they never bluff. You know, they never bluff. And what their argument, like, or like his argument was like, you know, I've called here, you know, 5 times, they always have the nuts. And the problem with this is like, let's take an example. You have like a hot stove, and you would put your hand on the hot stove, you would burn yourself. You would do it twice or 3 times. At some point, you would just stop. You know, like it makes sense. It's always bad result. And the problem with poker is that a good action doesn't equal a good result. And this could be so many instances with the variance involved that, you know, a plus EV bluff catcher could be the wrong, like you could catch 10 times and could be wrong 10 times. And this catcher could still be a plus EV bluff catcher. And the problem with this is if you're not super conscious and rational about this, you could just start getting into like really bad habits. And that's what I mean with be the least amount of human when you're playing, or when it comes to poker related stuff. Is like when you actually have data that someone is over bluffing in the spot or under bluffing, the logical thing to do is, or like the thing you have to, the action that you have to do, or is the most profitable one, will always be the most profitable one, regardless of the first 5, 10, 15 times of the outcome. Like you might be losing your stack 12 out of 15 times despite doing the better action. And just seeing this as the bigger picture, if this happens 1,000 times, it's gonna be profitable in the long run. And I think people, especially like lower stakes players, like they confuse their emotions and experience with instead of just looking at actual data. Because I always had this argument, is like, he's telling me, no, they never bluff you, they always have nuts, and so on. And then like, okay, show me in your database, you probably have 1 million hands. Show me 5 hands of that being true. He couldn't show me 2 of those hands. And the thing is, like, they're just convincing themselves about this being so true because it happened to them 5 times or whatever X amount of times, and they're not really thinking about, like, or that they cannot be rational enough, or like, they cannot reflect about the spot enough in order to get to the conclusion that is actually required, that this action is good, the result doesn't really matter.
Yeah, no, I can strongly agree. For example, sometimes, let's say I randomly watch a Twitch stream, and then you hear exactly that phrase, oh, people never fold here, people never bluff here. I'm like, I would strongly disagree in some of these. And also people ask you, sometimes you get a question, do people bluff at Huntington L Zoom? What kind of question is that? This is way more nuanced. Yes, like certain player profiles over bluff a certain line, under bluff a different line. Certain, there's a texture, there's bet sizing. It's way more nuanced. We cannot just have one answer. And then I think a very big problem is once you have like a certain story in your mind, the confirmation bias comes in that every time they don't bluff, you say, you see, I told you, they never bluff. And like this might happen. Let's say they show the bluff 4 out of 5 times. All those 4 times they show the bluff gets overwritten by that one time that they can confirm their original bias that someone would never bluff by saying, I told you, he never bluffs. And they basically discard the other information. Basically, like the bias doesn't allow any new information to come in. And I think this also, again, comes back to the other point where they have to then admit that they were wrong all that time, which is quite a tough pill to swallow, I can imagine.
Yeah. And I think maybe the third point is that people do not understand or focus on the wrong things when they try to improve or move up. It's like, I even nowadays, not a few days ago actually, saw a professional poker player and streamer playing GTO Wizard. And when I see someone studying 150 BB deep under the gun versus cutoff flat spots, I am just completely losing my mind. Like, I really get so sad and tilted at the same time that I have to switch off, because otherwise I would probably just, educate too many people. Because like, I try to be a reasonable human being. So if I talk strat with someone, or like if I study with someone, especially with people that I studied with, I'm very open in what I do, and I would probably share like 95% of the stuff, or like probably all of the stuff, and on how I approach the game and what I think. And I would never, if someone is asking me about some specific thing, either like I give him like a very precise answer of how I think, or if that is like too much, I would just say like, I don't really want to go further into detail because of this and that. I would never just bullshit around and make up stupid stuff, if that makes sense. And if I had to watch this for half an hour, I couldn't help myself and just help this guy, because if there is 2 instances in an entire year where you play this spot, then probably a lot already. And just wasting more than 5 minutes looking at this spot, and even those 5 minutes, is just absolutely insane.
This is the secret, guys, to being efficient with your time so you can rise up to the ranks very fast. Study spots that are frequent or high in EV.
That is a pretty good advice for people out there.
Hi guys, Rene aka the Wacko here with a quick Mechanics of Poker 2.0 announcement, because we are currently open to receive 10 new players in our Mechanics of Poker coaching program. In our program you will get access to 80 plus hours of content in which we will explain you all aspects needed in order to become a more successful poker player. Now, one of these, of course, is the technical aspect of the game, in which I'll be explaining you all the mechanics behind poker strategies. We'll be talking about GTO, exploitive play, with an extra focus on the why behind certain strategies and why the population has certain leaks. And to increase your win rate even further, we've recently added a river bluff and bluff catching section, so you can increase your EV when those pots become very big. Our mindset and performance coach, Adam Carmichael, he took care of the mental game and performance section of this program, in which he will teach you everything you need to know in order to break through limiting beliefs, better handle your emotions, break free from tilt, and play your A game more consistently. And last but not least, we've added the management and optimization section in the program, in which we will give you various tips and tricks to make it more likely for your poker career to succeed, and how to continuously improve as a poker player. Now, on top of that, this concept is continuously evolving based on feedback and suggestions we get from our community. Next to all this content, you will have access to our exclusive Discord community, monthly live Q&A calls, and one-on-one coaching session in which we are going to be reviewing if you have been implementing the stuff that we teach you in the mechanics of poker correctly. So do you think you have what it takes to master the mechanics of poker? And will you take one of the 10 available seats? Go over to mechanicsofpoker.com and apply for the program, and maybe you will get a chance to work with me and Adam and make more progress in your poker career. But for now, without further ado, let's get back into more goodness in today's episode. We have talked some poker strategy as well, and I know another thing that tilts you a lot is when people play their hand, correct?
Yeah, that is I mean, I don't how do I say
like, because like we're here maybe to give some good advice, and there's I think if I quote you, you were saying, oh, this is advice that a lot of people always give, but this doesn't help your poker game.
Yeah, I mean, especially oftentimes this the specific thing that you said, this just tilts me when someone who I think is somewhat reasonable or is trying to play the game is playing their hand specifically, because it's kind of an insult towards the guy that you're playing against, if that makes sense. Because that would mean that like you're so weak that you could never exploit me for me only having this hand in that specific moment. I do not blame weaker players for doing that, because that's why they are in this kind of category, or like why they're still on lower stakes, because they haven't figured it out yet. I mean, my main job is to figure out whether this guy is actually just having this sort of strategy, or this bet is triggered by this exact hand, and then go from there. But usually what happens is if like decent players start showing up with hands in nodes that are not a thing, and I know that it's not a thing, and it's very likely that he's not knows that it's not a thing, yeah, that's a bit triggering while playing. Not saying that I get tilted and start screaming in front of the computer, but I might just get carried away and just freestyle as well in that specific spot.
No, yeah, but I remember very specifically, it told you more that than when people are trying to learn, and then other people, they're educating people on the wrong things to do.
That is insane. Oh yeah, that's insane. Obviously, like I think it's fine to just play poorly, but charging a lot of money for coaching other people while giving them poor kind of advice is even like that. That's just so. I mean, the thing is, like, can you even blame the guy, because he probably thinks that he is doing the things correctly and he's doing everything right, and it might have worked for him for half a year or whatever it might be. So he thinks he has figured it out, but the problem is, if you know better and you know that this guy is just talking nonsensical stuff and is charging $400 per hour, it's very rough to take that pill.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? For example, obviously, I've done a lot of coaching, and I always give the disclaimer, like, listen, I'm just here to tell you what I know. And like you said, you have to be very aware that how I think about the game now. I think every year when I look back, I think different about the game than a year ago. I think it would also be a bit weird if you don't. Then I think you're very stuck. Yeah, I'm sure there's many players that now listen, well, I still think about the same about the game as 5 years ago. I'm like, probably should move on. It's always a disclaimer I give. Listen, and something that I will say will make sense, and other things maybe a year ago, if you ask me a year later, if you ask me, I say, yeah, this is how I looked at it back then. Nowadays, I look at it different, and this is just what you get, I think, for a game that is that is not solved, and that for a lot of parts of the tree, there's just no there's no clear answer, so to speak. But obviously, if the coach deliberately gives wrong information, that would obviously not be very ideal. But obviously, like there is a difference. Like I think when speaking to you outside of this podcast as well, we talked about this. Like, there's a certain benefit of you growing up in like a new school generation, right?
Yeah.
For example, when we talk strategy, you might sometimes hear me say stuff, but they say, yeah, that's very human. That's very human.
Yeah.
There's also there's like old habits that 10 years ago, maybe I learned something or thought something was in a certain way, and I just continue to believe that was true until, for example, in this case, Joseph tells me, well, Wacko, this is not the way to do it, But like, I think then you have the benefit of not having these bad habits. What do you think are like some bad habits that, or old school players or less studied players have?
Mm, I mean, I guess this, especially like this hand targeting kind of thing that you mentioned earlier, I think is a very bad habit, because you will, and especially versus good players, you will often end up with very nonsensical lines, and then people will sniff it out very quickly when they're good. And if you have that, because the problem with that is that this kind of habit will happen, like, you will end up in a lot of occasions with these kind of spots where you bet this because you target that whatever category might be. And like this kind of thinking, when you're just thinking about your hand versus the 2 or 3 hands that the guy that you put the guy on, basically, instead of thinking about your range versus his range, what like your entire strategy would do, then you just come up with 5 sizes on the river for 5 different hand classes versus 5 different hand classes against the other guy, where your entire range is completely intact when you use 4 or even all 5 of these sizes. And if you play against super aware players, which like the best players nowadays are, they don't need to see a lot of showdowns to start making assumptions about what you do, and you just start bleeding in these spots like very, very often. So I think playing, I think just, might I say, like, can't really tell. Probably you would have to come up with a lot of old habits or habits that you would have that could potentially be a leak, because other than that, I couldn't think about it too much. I just maybe thinking, for example, not in terms of MDFs, like the minimal fan frequencies, rather than, yeah, his bluffs need to work this many times, and like, no, he bluffs like this amount, and that's why whatever conclusion might come up, it's like, I just think about my entire range, and when I'm in the tough spot, I first of all think about like, how is he supposed to play? Is he capable of doing so? And then I know what my range approximately will look like. I don't know, probably people that are from the Piosolver era would structure the entire game plan a bit differently. So
yeah, I would say Piosolver, like nowadays, you play from a strategy where, for example, in Piosolver age, the dinosaur age, it was more like, yeah, you try to figure out what your opponent is up to, what he has, and then you try to counter that or target that. And obviously, there is a global sort of strategy involved. But this is also the thing, right? People were playing very suboptimal. So you could range people very specifically. People's range were constantly not intact. So the correct play was also to, basically, it was the correct thing to do because people didn't have an intact range all the time.
Yeah.
Whereas now, for example, with solvers, if people, for example, keep their range intact on, for example, flop turn, you cannot really target something specific because there is a whole range, right? So that thinking doesn't work anymore. It's outdated.
Yeah. I guess this would be basically the habit that probably is kind of a league, especially if you play in tougher games, or is certainly a league if you want to play in tougher games.
I would say it's interesting. I would say it's indeed a league in tougher games. But then in lower games, if your reads every time are way more accurate, for example, versus a recreational, you might do something specific versus the specific hands or ranges that he has, right? Because you can be transparent, and then in a vacuum, that play might be the highest EV. And since in the past, people were, basically everyone was a recreational, that kind of strategy was very incentivized. Whereas nowadays, people have less leaks. And I see this a lot, especially with like old school players and exploitative content and stuff. Like, and I can see how this worked because I used it as well over many years. But then for example, when we sit down at the 1K tables, the 2K tables, you know, and we're battling it out. Yeah, you know, the average guy who battles 1K or 2K, they don't have these leaks. Like in the past, I would just, you know, you open your HUD, it's like, oh yeah, he does this wrong, this wrong, this wrong. You build strategy, done, and the money would just print infinitely to you. But nowadays it's like, oh wait, there's no leaks. Oh wait, then maybe I should think about my own strategy and how to build our own solid strategy.
Yeah.
It was just because the way the opposition was in the past, a strategy like that was not very incentivized. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, how do I say, like when I talk about the game and the way I play, like specifically like when I consider these leagues is when you're playing in a very tough environment. And I would also agree that the stuff that you did will still work, especially versus recreationals and weaker opponents. But you could come to the same conclusion using the solver. So if you knew that this guy is overfolding in X spot, and you would note lock the solver and tell him, dude, like this guy is folding, then obviously the solver is also gonna be a huge maniac and just
for sure,
do whatever
like
he
said,
wants.
I'm definitely. I remember actually my game, I stagnated for a long time around like 501K, and then actually when I started to use solvers and build a more theoretical base and create a more understanding of what's actually going on, that's actually when my game that was kind of the thing that I needed in order for my game to progress. And I think nowadays the same, right? If you only stick to theory and if you don't sort of node lock in your head while playing and come up with the deviations that are available to you, because you know, like you said, people are playing suboptimal. It's both skills that you have to develop.
Yeah, I think this is
but definitely I prefer, but like I said, that route was not available to people like the route of studying theory first, and then once you're capable. I think this is something that I think Goosecore always says, right? You cannot exploit if you don't know what's the correct strategy.
Right. This is always
they don't have someone.
This is always what I wonder is when there's people out there that say that they're pure exploitative style and they only play exploitative, they never looked at solvers. It's like, how do you exploit? You don't even know what the fuck is going on. Like, where do you deviate? Where do you come from? You're just making things up and you're punting. Like, that's the only thing you do.
Exactly. You know, like I think often players just say, yeah, but this is an exploit. They just use it as an excuse to do whatever they felt like doing. You know?
I mean, this discussion between GTO and exploitative poker is like, you need to be really good at the game in order to even be allowed, or like before you should have some sort of judgment. Because the thing with GTO and exploitative poker is it's basically the same thing, you know. So like the equilibrium immediately shifts as soon as one of the guys is playing suboptimal. There will be a new equilibrium created for both players as soon as some combos do different stuff from what is GTO. So like playing exploitatively is just
finding the equilibrium,
right? Exactly.
Yeah. So basically what you're doing when playing poker is finding the equilibrium for the situation that's at hand.
Right, exactly.
And the tougher your opponent, the closer that equilibrium will look like the solver output that you've run in the afternoon in the solver.
Especially on earlier streets, and then on rivers you most of the times have to make assumptions. And
I'm curious, when moving up to the ranks, I'm sure you kept on encountering tougher opponents. Does anyone in particular stand out that you played against that made your life very difficult? And what is it about the way he plays or the strategy that kind of the top dogs in the game use that make them so difficult to play against?
I mean, that is like really hard to tell. Obviously, as soon like when you move up the first times, as I said, like you just probably, or like I played probably really poorly because I thought they were just every single spot they're just gonna be playing perfectly, and I just tried to not get run over. As soon as you figure out that these guys are also humans, that's what I stated earlier, it gets a lot easier. But I think especially on 2K plus when you play 3-4 handed, everyone that is playing, or like let's say 95% or 90% of the guys are like super solid. And I think playing against a guy that is really trying to play a super solid game is just the most difficult to play against, because you just end up being in spots where you have very marginal decisions constantly. It's like every decision that you make will not make a lot of money in equilibrium versus a guy that is playing like super solid. Like you're just basically shipping around money, and then the guy that makes the least mistakes will win a little bit. That's kind of what happens. And basically everyone that I play nowadays on 2K Star specifically, I think 464 was started playing like last couple of days again, probably got bored and wanted a bit of juice. And then I guess I couldn't name any specific. I just think that everyone is just super good. I think just calling out some random names is just will leave too much room for discussion open, even though it's just like 464 is an example, but there's a lot of players like him that are just super solid. And the problem is you would just need maybe, I don't know, 5 million hands of playing 300, 400 in order to really be judgmental of like who is the best, who has the best strategy, and then things shift while playing, so you could never come to a conclusion. Because what ends up happening is the guy that plays very solid and runs the best, it feels like this guy is unbeatable. It's probably
you always there's always if you would have a you do a survey and you talk about one player, one guy said, he always gets me. The other guy, what? He's terrible. It's like, no, it's over a certain sample. He every time put you in a difficult spot. Yeah. And, it can be that I'm just running let's say, for example, we play against each other. It can be that I just ran very good in the spots that I was given, like the run out every time was perfect. And you just feel like every time I get like the perfect spot to make a bluff or get the perfect spot to go a bit thin for value. And that's exactly when you called. And then over a short period, you can get the idea of like, wow, this guy is on another level. He's always one step ahead of me.
Yeah, I think this is specifically true on 2K plus. I think on 1K there is still, at least some of the times, some regs that join in and just want to play for whatever reason. I think that on 1K you can still have a decent edge over other professionals. Talking about stars and ACR maybe specifically, because like these are the places where a lot of reg battling happening. But I think the guys that play like 3 and 4 and 2K and 5K and PokerStars, for example, like everyone is like super solid. And I think just calling out random names that I subjectively feel that they are the best, despite they're just running very well against me, whereas other guys are equally good and just didn't have like a very poor run against me, would just probably be a bit unfair, kind of, and very subjective in terms of not be. I mean, I could not be able to say like this guy is the best and this guy is the worst of the guy that battles.
For sure. Like I said, I was more looking for like a common trait that the top dogs have that make them very hard to play against. And that's exactly what you already said, right? Their strategy doesn't leave room for one decision to be clearly better to take than the other, right? If someone is let's say, for example, someone is over passive, just every time you have a bluff catcher and you just fold. If someone is, way too much to the other side and just very over aggressive, it's like, okay, probably less pleasant, but every time you just call down, it's right in the middle where you're like,
this is also what sometimes I think is like very funny is when this happened also, like when I was coaching the lower stakes players. Sometimes I was streaming my sessions and just sharing some thoughts, and then you just end up, like, let's say it's on 2K and you end up in a spot where it's like a 3-way pot and the money goes in on the river and you have a reasonable bluff catcher, which, like in a spot where best case you win 1 BB, 2 BB, worst case you lose a little bit, probably somewhere in between, and you're like, whatever. I mean, I know that it's at least a frequency call in theory, so might even roll for it, and then we just press call. And, just as the nuts, we lose our stack, that's fine. And then like one of my students said, yeah, I mean, look, this guy is so good, like it's just an easy call. Like, well, I mean, come on, like this guy has infinite bluffs here, right? It's just an easy call. And like, dude, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm playing for infinite amounts of money here. Let's say there's 200 BB, and I might, with my call, I might win 1 or 2 BBs every time I make this call, or lose 2 or 3 BBs. I would rather play in an environment, because like he was stating, in my stakes, they would never bluff here. So like I would always fold.
Complain about that, huh?
Yeah.
I noticed that as well.
But to be very honest, I think I had this habit too when I was playing on lower stakes. It's like complaining about this. Nowadays, it's just, I would love to play in a pool where it's full of nits. Like that would be the greatest. That would be not in terms of, like the competitive aspect, but in terms of money and just winning the most. Like every decision would be so clear and easy. I could just chill the entire day and print. But whereas
or the other way around, right? They say, yeah, I have a bunch of stations. They're not capable of folding. I'm like, well, that's great. Just stop fucking bluffing.
Yeah. It's so crazy. Like this kind of logic gets me every single time when I
But
hear
this is also, I think, like something that attracts, I think a romantic aspect of poker is, maybe also because the media televises stuff, making cool bluffs, cool bluff catchers. You understand?
Yeah.
This is actually spots where this is not where the EV comes from, right?
Yeah.
But people like to think because it gives you. I mean, I'm sure you've been in situations where you put it out a great bluff or a great bluff catch where you really like that was a nice one.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think it's great
satisfying.
when you call down with fifth pair and you're like, right, but you have to be rational about the situation that you want a stack now, but this call is break even or slightly winning at best.
And then the problem comes when I think you also mentioned that when people play to win or they play. I remember I had some students as well that would just thrive off this shit. They would just pick on every good marginal bluff catch opportunity just because they wanted to feel invincible or like they did something great, And that's kind of when you kind of miss the point. I actually noticed it in my own game as well when I'm a bit off balance and not in great mindset. Then I get way too, I don't know, that I play poker way too fancy or I'm trying to do something funky. And this is like you said, then you're playing a bit outcome based. You're playing to get something out of the game other than listen, I'm just here to try to show up as a better version than yesterday, play a better strategy than I did yesterday, improve on my leagues.
Yeah, totally agree.
Adam, I'm sure you have something to add to this story.
Yeah, I think it's very fascinating. I've been listening along to you guys chatting about almost. There's something about like the feeling you get from catching a bluff. It's almost like I outsmarted you. There's something that players hold on to where there's that nice feeling of I'm better than you. And I speak to a lot of players who have mindset issues, let's call it, or struggling with these issues. And very often they make things very personal. The river spot isn't a strategy game. It's like, this guy is trying to pull one over on me. I'm going to get him here. Oh, he's been aggressive with me twice. And they make it this big deal where it becomes this very visceral thing. They've got adrenaline pumping through the body. And they're like, I can't let this guy get me. And all of a sudden, we're not playing poker anymore. We're playing this game of like, I need to get one over on him. And then they make a decision, often on emotion, and then regret it later. On the flip side, they get that right. And they get this amazing endorphin release. And they're like, wow, got him there. Yes. And they almost like put that in their kind of storage bank. So next time they get bluffed, call them down because these guys bluffed me. So yeah, they can create these.
Yeah, they're chasing. They're kind of chasing that feeling, right? And that's exactly, almost like the confirmation bias. Every time it's very bad when it goes right because then they get that endorphin, and the next time they want that endorphin again.
Exactly, and it creates like a feedback loop where now it's like catching a bluff feels good. On the flip side as well, when you're bluffing, it's the same dynamic where it feels good to bluff somebody to get one over on them. And yeah, as you mentioned before, I think what did you say? You said losing is the highest EV decision at this moment. It's one of those things where it's very hard for a human to accept that. Like giving up on this spot, it makes me the most money. Not bluffing here makes me the most money. Folding here makes me the most money. It's kind of counterintuitive, this kind of human aspect, as Josef talks about, that players struggle with because it feels, yes, it's difficult in the moment. Obviously, from a logical perspective, it's very simple. It's very easy, but yeah, we get caught up in these dynamics which make it very difficult. And myself and Rene have done a lot of work on this in terms of the mental game of bluff catching and trying to create systems to help players decide when to bluff and when to bluff catch, because it becomes challenging because players get wrapped up in these dynamics. And very often you'll end up with a player who creates a profile, he always bluffs, or he bluffs way too much, or he underbluffs too much. Because it's a very polarized situation, or they'll bluff catch too much, or not bluff catch enough. So if you have a tendency that's gone one way or the other, very often there's a lot linked into that, which you need to undo to kind of get you back to that baseline. So yeah, lost unpack.
I'm curious, Josef. Like, you don't seem to struggle with any of these things. Is this something that you've consciously worked on, or were you born with it, sort of?
Nah, I think so. I mean, the way I see this is like, I certainly had a lot of these habits too when I was starting out and playing lower stakes. Maybe not as extreme as others, but I certainly was complaining about others being bad, about never bluffing, still bluff catching in these kind of spots. I was just, being very bad at the game. But what I always try is to, when I'm in those kind of situations where it's like I would just be very mad at myself. Like, let's say I could talk to a mirror that would just observe me playing, and I would discuss with my mirror about like how I feel in this game. And the other, like my mirror could be very rational about it. It's like, you're just a stupid fuck. Like, what are you doing here? Like, just think about it and you can work it out. You know, like I'm just trying to be, and this is why I mentioned this earlier. I'm just, when it comes to poker related stuff, I'm just trying to be the least amount of human that I can be in that kind of situation. And every time I kind of have some sort of emotional feeling or like some sort of emotion that would trigger an action, like I kind of build this some sort of trigger in my head where I immediately ask myself whether this is, like when I have an emotion, I immediately ask myself if this emotion not triggered because of that or that, and does it make sense? So like I immediately in the spot, I would think about, is this now rational? Have I really worked this out, or do I just, you know, make this decision based out of emotions? And I think nowadays I just got really good at this, catching myself before I made the decision to kind of correct myself before everything already went down. And obviously I still, maybe once a month or once every 2 months, there's obviously going to be something in there.
It's a range, right? You do it less than maybe.
Exactly. And then every time it happens, I just try to avoid it even further. And I think I tried to do this for like ever since I started being professional. I just sat down and I'm like, yeah, okay, I can't be tilting. Like, this is what I do for a living now. Like, just tilting is absolutely pathetic. Like, I can't get annoyed about this. This is just my job. Like, if I feel so bad about situations that I cannot make conscious or like rational decision anymore, I would just have to stop playing. Like, this is what I said.
This is like sort of the identity that you created for yourself. I'm a professional poker player, and Joseph, the professional poker player, does not tilt. This is unacceptable.
Yeah, right. And this is like, if I could talk to like the other myself, so to speak, like I would just get very mad at myself if I had all these habits, because if you think about it rationally, they are very stupid and they just contribute nothing to your life, your game, your kind of living experience. But obviously it's gonna happen some of the time. But every time like an emotion comes up while playing, I try to question whether, you know, this is the right thing to do and why I feel about it that way, and try to basically get rid of that as soon as possible in order to being able to make a rational decision, whatever the spot might be.
For the listeners, this is definitely something different than blocking your emotions. You're clearly describing, I feel a certain emotion coming up, and before I make a decision, I question myself if this decision is based on a certain emotion or pure rational logic, correct?
Right.
Actually,
yeah, I'd say this. Sorry, yeah. I was gonna say this is a skill like emotional regulation, where he's doing quite a lot of things. It sounds very simple, but first of all, he's aware that an emotion has come into his kind of body and it's impacting his decision. So the awareness that my emotional state is changed. He then takes a step back and goes, what triggered this? What triggered this change in my emotional state? Is this a positive thing or negative? And then he uses logic to override that emotion and go, actually, no, it's coming from my insecurities or this opponent who's beat me. I can drop that. So those seem very easy. It's a very, this can happen very quickly, but for most players, they get stuck in an emotion. The emotion takes over and they're not very good at spotting in real time that the emotional state has changed and an event that happens likely triggered that. For you, though you described it very simply, it's a very high level skill to be able to spot emotional changes, observe the trigger that caused that, and objectively change the meaning of that event in real time is pretty high level skills.
It's interesting that you mentioned, like, I think you said, it's just an emotion. It's stupid. It's not rational. But I have found, though, I definitely experience more of these things, or at least than what it seems like you experience. I found that it's like emotions, in my opinion, it's interesting because it's stupid. I don't think is the right word. They often actually make sense. Like they don't make sense, but they make sense. Adam, can you help me out there? I'm lost.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, the emotion always makes sense based on the meaning you're giving the event. So if you get angry, it's because
it doesn't make sense in that exact situation, but there's a certain maybe underlying meaning that this situation could represent, and for that, it actually makes sense somewhere in you.
Yeah, and what Josef is doing is stripping that layer away. He's almost like freeze framing time and going, oh, emotions change. There's something that's triggered that. That means I'm giving this event a meaning, which isn't logical, or it's not helping me in this situation. Okay, that's not logical. Drop that. So couldn't that mean enough? Emotion drops with it. All right, let's play poker again. Here we go. So though I can feel complicated emotions, in real time, when people are good with emotions, they're very good at like this rational process of spotting things happening, dropping the meaning, and then carrying on. Where other people who struggle with emotions get caught in the stories, caught in the meaning, stuck in the emotion, and then it plays out from there. So yeah, that's kind of the high level overview.
So how do we acquire the superpower? Where did you buy this, Joseph?
I don't know.
Where did you buy it?
Amazon link.
Maybe at some point
Description down
we can negotiate about the product, but nah, like I don't know. I just set my. This is basically what it comes to when the goal that I set myself is just to be the best possible version of me. And in terms of poker, it's like every day I try to think about, especially when these things came up, like why did this happen, and then try to improve. And I do this, or like I try to do this basically on a daily basis without having some sort of fixed schedule that I just sit down and write things down and stuff. I just try to kind of help myself in that situation in order to improve from day to day and day, and to become, to basically minimize all the stuff that would hurt my long-term EV or my poker skills or my improvement, to be very, I think, I guess like I'm very gifted in that way, or I have to be, because a lot of the players that I talk to, or some of the players, they do struggle like a lot more with this kind of tilt, emotional stuff and stuff like that. But I'm also not 100% convinced that people try as hard as I do in terms of improving that skill, if that makes sense. Because you could just play a session, you could get tilted, and then you just stand up, have your food, like go out and not really think about it. And when this happens 10 times, you're like, maybe I should change something, and then you don't change anything. Every time this thing comes up, I'm trying to reflect the entire situation, like why did this happen, and does this make sense, and like does it help me in terms of poker? Obviously, like in life it's completely different.
Yeah, when people just stand up and go away and try to do different things, they're trying to feel different, and then the next time they're in a situation, it will just be repeat, because nothing has changed.
And I mean, this is like the guys that I know in real life, that I hang out some of the times that are also poker players. They're also stated that I'm kind of gifted with that kind of mentality, because they oftentimes come up to me like, dude, I'm running so bad, I just get this and that, and I'll start punting because I got so tilted and stuff. And I was like, look, if you could just look at yourself while playing, and you could interact with yourself, like just a version of yourself that wasn't in the heat of the moment, like you could clearly tell yourself that this doesn't make sense what you're doing here, and this is just a bad action triggered by an emotion which will end up losing or hurting yourself. So this is kind of how I see the things, that if you're just kind of hindering yourself or basically just damaging yourself in a way where it's money or emotional, like just emotional stress, like I just try to not avoid it, but being very, very conscious about this, and basically have a conversation with myself, if that makes any sense, that that I could do this without, the emotion is completely fine in that moment. It's like if you feel like you're getting run over and these guys just always have it every single time, I'm like, yeah, what the fuck is going on? These guys are after me, and you get 4-bet 10 times in a row, like these guys are after me. It turns out they just always have the nuts, like that's just how it works. And I think the better you are at accepting those things and trying to be very rational about it, the less often you will do mistakes, and the higher your win rate eventually will be. And this is kind of the driver for me. Just
I think the key aspect of what you said there is very important. The emotion is completely fine, and then you said this can happen. So there's the emotion and there's a story, and the story is this can happen. Yeah. Where Adam, I think a lot of players, they come up with a different story, right? Like they say, he's after me. That's a different story that people start telling based on the emotion. Whereas Josef, his stories are way more rational. They're like, oh yeah, I'm upset. I feel upset. Yeah, obviously I feel upset. That's completely fine. But this situation can happen. Move on.
Exactly. And with Joseph's kind of way of thinking, he's learning from his emotions. So every emotion that comes up, he inspects it. He almost like puts it under a magnifying glass. Why is this here? It was in this moment. Is it helping me? Is it rational? Okay, drop it and move on. So every emotion comes up as a signal into to almost like drop that story narrative that he has in that moment and to be more rational in that moment. And I think it was very interesting when you said some of your friends know that you're gifted with this. And I just think it's such a cop out because it basically means like you've developed skills that you've worked on in this way. Like even the way you talk about your day to day, you think, you reflect, you go deep, you work on stuff. This didn't happen by chance. You didn't just naturally wake up with these kind of insights. You're working on this daily, and people who are willing to go deep on themselves like to label other people. He's good at that. Yeah, it's easy for him. He doesn't have emotions, but I've got emotions, so I can't do what you do. In reality, you have a framework of thinking. So what would be better for your friends to ask you is go, how do you think about poker? How do you strip away all these emotional layers? How do you use so much logic? So the way I look at you, you're basically playing a game of poker to be the best version of yourself. And that's all that really matters. So everything else is looked at that through that lens. So you're really reflecting, you're inspecting, and you're trying to think, how can I be a better version of myself? So every time an emotion comes up, you go, oh, interesting, this emotion came up. How could I use this to become better and learn from it? And very often it's, overriding that illogical response and learning from it. But it's a consistent iteration. So when other players say like, oh, they're not capable of doing that, I'd get them to question that. And very often like, they're not playing the same game as you. They're not honestly playing the game of, I want to be the best version of myself, and I'm going to put the effort into that every single day. Because they start introspecting themselves. They start going, right, actually, there is some things I'm doing here that I keep repeating day after day. And after my session, I go and watch Netflix, or I go on YouTube. And I don't actually look at where that came from. And I'm not working on these root causes, but the same emotion comes up every session I play for the last 3 years. Oh, interesting. So how much work have you really done on that? So yeah, I think it's, you've obviously you're playing a different game, but also you develop skills that I think other players could develop if they put the work in.
Yeah, it sounds more like a victim and a bit of fixed mindset. Well, like you said, like, oh, I have emotions, you don't, so therefore, whereas they are not, like Josef has a clear image of what a professional player striving to become one of the best, what that entails, and dealing with this is and how to better deal with this in the future and come up with better strategies is part of that.
Yeah, I mean, also what I think is, like, to add something to that stuff is that I'm trying to always see being optimistic in every single spot and turn basically negative things into positive things. What I mean with that, for example, let's take 2 examples, is like every time you 3-bet, you get 4-bet. Like, let's say you play half an hour and this happens 10 times. And this guy's a super nit, he just had it every single time. So what you could do is either you fold every single time and you're down like a little bit, or you could start punting around and give this guy another 2 stacks. So basically, you just won in that instance by just staying calm, and you like not, how do you say, like the emotions not taking over. Same example would be, I mean, first of all, I think checking results while playing, or generally checking results like too often, is very toxic and a very bad habit for a poker player. But I, for example, only check results after I finished my session. And I think, like, in terms of, I never really get kind of triggered. So like I could be down infinite, doesn't matter. I could be up infinite, doesn't matter. Like, just next day is going to be a new day and that's it. But how I see things is, like, I start a session and then I play, I play like 4 or 5K tables and then like some 1K, 2K tables, and I lose like 3 buy-ins immediately. Let's say in the first half an hour, I get cooled 3 times on 5K, and then I'm basically infinite down, and there's no way of this ever being breaking even session. So what I do is, I basically, I think to myself, if this session ends up just being 10K down or like 15K down, this would be a huge win. Like I'm not sitting there like at the end of the session. I'm like, yeah, like if I'm 10K down, like this is basically a session that is won. I just got cooled 3 times. What can I do? If I don't lose like unnecessary stuff, or if I start punting, this session was still a good session despite the result being bad. Like there was no hands that I was in control of, and it will be the other way around eventually. And some players would probably be steaming after this 30 minutes, just getting cooled 3 times. They cannot do anything about it. It's completely standard spot. And they would just end up maybe even regrinding, or like grinding longer than they're supposed to do because they're stuck so much, which is absolutely insane. So like if I sit there and the session started off like really bad, I'm like, everything that is not down infinite amounts of money is a good session, and then I wrap it up. I'm only down 7,000 instead of like 15. I'm like, man, this is a great session. I basically won.
I'm curious to know how you've been able to develop this mindset, because I love this kind of, I class this as perspective. So perspective is almost like the lens you see life through. It can be optimistic, it can be pessimistic, it can be neutral. So let's say you're losing a session, exactly as you've said, you could be like, oh, why me? How have I lost this much money? That's like the kind of negative glass. You could just be, all right, well, this happened, whatever, life goes on, it's just a few buy-ins. Or you could do your version, which is the ultimate of, right, anything from here is a win. All right, let's get to it. If I'm only down 14K, that's awesome. So I'm really curious, like, to know how you've developed this skill. Have you been someone who throughout your life has been an optimistic person, or has been anything that's helped you to create this? So if I look at myself in terms of perspective skills, Stoicism and Stoic philosophy has been one of the things that's really helped me to cultivate a more positive and neutral perspective, and to see things that are out of your control as either neutral or in your favor. But it took me a while to like cultivate that in lots and lots of scenarios. It seems like for you, you might have already developed that naturally, but yeah, I'm curious to know how you've been able to work on your perspective skills.
I think it was kind of a skill that I might even had prior to poker, maybe not that kind of developed as it is now, but like usually the way it happened is, it does, whether it was in school, it was a job, it was at university, what ended up happening is, like, even if you failed an exam, if you forgot about something, if at work something didn't go well or went the wrong way, you know, the world was still there the next day, you know, like everything kept being the same thing, even though like sometimes you might lose whatever, like if you fail at university, you need to take longer. Sometimes like a job, it might be critical because you get fired or whatever, if that happens. But at the end of the day, like nothing really changes with a bad outcome. And I think just accepting the fact that bad outcomes are just part of life and living with it, and start appreciating like the good outcomes more often, because I think this is what people saw, like people are just always complaining about this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, and nobody's really appreciating the good things about life. So like when someone is complaining about his run bad, and he's saying like, I just lost 10 sessions in a row and I run so bad this month, and I like, dude, look at the 7 other months where you just had the nuts every single time and made infinite money. Like, no, you never like mentioning this as often as the last 10 sessions, you know. This is just probably what life taught me, is that, you know, bad experiences do not necessarily have to mean, you know, bad results, so to speak. And there was, or at least this is how I gone through life, is like the positive sides always outweigh the negative side. So like, I know even I have bad sessions, I know that there's a lot of good session. I have a good session more often than a bad session, so I do not really complain about the bad session. And I know that this is part of the game, also losing, because if it was so easy to win, everyone would just do it. And that's so I guess I had this kind of mindset developed prior to poker already, but it really kind of got better and better while I was playing and trying to be more conscious about like that specific stuff.
I think because you're always reflecting, you're always like trying to see patterns in your life and how things are working. So just for your life experience, you're realizing, on good days, life goes on. On bad days, life goes on. When I have the worst times of my life, the sun comes up in the morning, the birds still sing. Like things don't change too much around you, but in our world, like in our little bubble of our minds, sometimes things are like crazy different day to day. And once we can zoom out and see the bigger lens of our lives as a whole, most things are fine day to day. And I think they kind of, like you said, acceptance is one big skill, like accepting what happens, but also like realizing I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay no matter what. I have a downswing, I'm going to be okay. I have a bad day, I'm going to be okay. Because I think often we get so wrapped up in the small ups and downs, like say losing X amount of buy-ins for a few weeks, because we think that it's going to lead to something that we can't recover from. It's going to lead us down to a catastrophic outcome that we need to worry about and panic, where you're almost like, I play with a good bankroll management, I've got good skills in what I do, life's good, I've got good circumstances around me, everything's going to be fine. And then from that lens, it allows you actually to double down on the other kind of avenue, which is gratitude for what you have, and like appreciating when you're winning, appreciating the fact that you get to play poker for a living when lots of people are having jobs that they don't enjoy, and that also strengthens that kind of enjoyment what you're doing and gives you that kind of balanced perspective. So yeah, really, really high level. It's good that you've been able to develop that just through observation and kind of watching your own life and realize, actually I've got things covered.
Yeah, no,
all right.
I will add that there are certainly also days where maybe I had bad sleep, I didn't have enough sleep, like some stuff in life happened where I might not be as good in terms of, you know, the stuff that I stated earlier, where, you know, the emotions come up, and as soon as there's one decision, especially when I play like 300 or 400, and I know that I just made a mistake based off emotions, and I cannot really, like, in the heat of the moment, I cannot really get away, get this emotion away. I immediately stop for this day. Like I just stop playing, and then just, you know, sit down, just think about it, and just come back the next day, because like these are the days usually where where I lose the most if I keep playing.
Well, welcome to being human, for one. But again, that's also where most players in that situation would play too long. They'd grind through those sessions and lose more buys than you do. They also wouldn't go away and like try to reflect on why they were feeling that emotion. Were they tired? Did something come up? And they might not learn from that the same way you do. So even your bad days are probably a lot better than someone else who might be experiencing those same bad days. But yeah, I think having the emotions and realizing we're not robots. We don't have this static emotional state that stays consistent. We have ups and downs, good days, bad days, but how we navigate those consistently matters a lot. Yeah. All right, I'm really curious now to go into some reflection. All right, so for you, you're in quite a unique situation where you've progressed through the levels quite quickly. So you've almost like played the hundreds, the 200s, the 500s somewhat recently compared to like a lot of the high stakes guys we speak to who might have played them 5-6 years ago. So I think it'd be good to look back on maybe your earlier career and maybe give some kind of insights into players who are trying to progress. So let's say there's a 100NL player watching this, listen to this, and he's like, oh, I want to progress up the stakes. I would love to play in 1Ks, 2Ks in the future, but I don't know how to progress in the right way. I feel like I'm overwhelmed right now. I'm doing a lot, I'm studying a lot, but I don't have like direction of where to go. Is there any advice that you would give to that player looking at your own trajectory when you were in that situation that could be helpful for him?
Yeah, so I think that connecting with like-minded people, or trying to connect with like-minded people, is a very big part. And also, that probably was a very bad skill back then. Nowadays, I'm a bit better at this, is just not being, you know, not getting your ego in the way of asking stupid questions, if that makes sense, and asking other people for help and advice, because even if they play the same stake, they might have, that they can help you out in different areas where you might struggle. And the second thing is just, you know, focusing on everything that you can do rather than just putting it, or like blaming others in every possible scenario. Like the only thing you can blame is variance for downswing, but that's all in poker. Like you cannot, and this is probably what everyone is going to experience. Like as soon as you actually get to play against really good players, you start appreciating, you know, the 100, 200, 500 grand, where every decision now, I mean, at this point, obviously back then it's different, is super clear. So start thinking about how you could, you know, how you could shift your strategy when you play in weaker games, and also try to, you know, connect with people that have different opinions in order to maybe merge or create something that, you know, will help you improve or excel your game.
Yeah, and this has come up a few times in this conversation, letting go of the ego and trying to get past that ego so you can actually progress and move forwards. And I think all three of us have observed similar trends, that players who get stuck very often create large egos and they aren't able to ask questions. They can't change their viewpoints. They're not looking for help or trying to improve their strategy in the same way. So what advice would you give to somebody who might be going, okay, well, at the moment, I do have a little bit of ego. I like to be right about things. If I'm having a conversation with friends, I'm always the guy who's pushing my strategy and telling them I'm right. How do you start to release some of that? Because there's an element of kind of control they get from having a kind of viewpoint. How do you get someone to start letting go of their ego, be more open-minded, and be more curious to learn?
Yeah, that's a really tough one, actually. I mean, coming up with an idea is probably, right now, is fairly difficult. I think that kind of person probably needs a coach or someone that is playing way higher than him, because the way you described the guy, I would feel that he would, you know, have his perception of himself being, you know, so advanced and so much better than the others, that players on his level, you know, their opinions won't matter as much. Whereas when someone is playing 10 times the stake and telling you, dude, what you're saying here is bullshit, then this guy might start thinking, well, maybe there's a chance that I'm wrong in this spot. So I guess if you have that sort of ego problem, I think the best way would either to reach out to people that play higher, or or start investing into coaching, or probably coaching from someone that you think is really good. Because I guess this ego perspective, you would need a person that you would think is actually better than you in order to believe or like trust the stuff that he's saying. So I guess that would probably the solution that I could come up with in that short period.
That's great advice. And obviously, like, you haven't had that problem, but the way you problem solved that was great. And I think you're correct in terms of, like, you need inputs from outside that you respect in order to question what you're thinking. And that player who I described most likely has a lot of blind spots, and they won't listen to advice from people around them because they build their own kind of ego to a certain level. So they're going to need someone to shatter that. Someone who's like way higher, who goes, look, you're viewing this all wrong, and they're going to respect that person. So yeah, just obviously a certain profile, but I think it's interesting to think of the players who might be listening to this conversation, who might be struggling to apply some of these concepts that we're kind of touching over, and they might go, I'd love to let go of my ego, but actually I can't right now. What do I do? So I think it's good action steps. And then in terms of focusing on what you control, very stoic concept as well. For you, like, it seems like a very natural skill set just to strip things down to their core components and go, right, what do I control right now? What happens when things are going out of your control and there's not much to hold on to? So let's talk about like a downswing that you're maybe experiencing. Actually, obviously there's something to control, but what do you hold on to during uncertainty? Let's say you're during a bad patch of your career, things aren't going well, there's not much to cling on externally in results terms. What are some of the things you do or double down on during those periods to give yourself an element of control?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously, in every single downswing, the longer it goes, the more you start doubting on what you're doing, because the risk, like, you have probably not changed or even improved this period, and the results are just getting worse and worse, and they're not really reflecting on what you would be expecting or what you would want it to be. So what I end up doing is, I mean, this is probably more easy for me, is like, I just take either like an hour or something, I just sit down and then look first of all at all the biggest pots that I played in that period, and basically like look out for stuff that I did wrong, when in a moment where I know that I'm very rational, not directly after a losing session, not before the session. Like, I just sit down, like whenever I do not grind or have a 3-day, just looking at every single spots, obviously like doing some sort of hand review, also putting this over, does this make sense, is this right? And this kind of, like, let's say I look at 30 hands and 20 of them are played poorly, then I obviously have to, think about what I'm doing and start changing the stuff that I did in these 20 hands and try to improve. But usually what ends up happening is, like, I just see again that all these hands were just not even close, or like most of those hands were not even close, and I couldn't do anything about it, which makes me feel like a lot better in that moment, because while playing, you kind of make this decision, but you don't really have the time to reflect your decision while playing, because there's like so much going on. You're playing 7-8 tables, and you cannot really come to a conclusion. Whereas when you sit down and take an hour or two to look through all of those spots, like, you can easily just work out whether this was just you played poorly or you just ran bad in that moment. And what I do is, when I really have doubts over like a very long period of time, you can just always pull up the infinite hand sample with like that sort of win rate that you have, and put it into the variance calculator, and then there is like basically zero chance that you're losing in the long run if you didn't change or like started playing poorly at some point. So just this kind of comes back to convincing yourself that everything is good, everything is fine, and we're just having like a bad period where a lot of stuff is happening that you're not in control of yourself.
So important. I hope people listening to this are taking notes, because it's so fundamental to this process you went through. You're using data to reconfirm that you're on the right path and that there's nothing to freak out about. So you're analyzing spots. You're not just going, oh, I'm just going to keep playing for this downswing and hope it works out. You're looking at kind of your overall results to prove to yourself and remind yourself you're winning player, so your mind doesn't start catastrophizing that this 2-month downswing is going to last forever. So you're almost like using this kind of data and analysis to bring you back to a centered point and go, actually, things are okay. On the flip side, you might also look at your game and go, actually, yeah, some leaks are coming up. There's actually some things that are coming my game right now. I need to step things up. I'm getting really sloppy in these spots. I need to work on those. So it's not as like a blindsided just going and keep going. It's this stopping, analyzing, what do I control right now? Anything I need to improve? Nope, all good. Everything's going well. All right, let's keep playing through that. I think having that ability to do that, creates this kind of anchor that stops you getting too down when things aren't going your way and maybe, losing confidence.
Yeah, I think this is also the benefit of downswings, at least for me, is like when I'm on a downswing, this is the time where I study the most, because I have the most doubts about my game. Whereas when I just sun run and I have the nuts every single time, it's not that hard to get the money in at this. They just it's just way easier to play when I run really well. I probably just do the study sessions that I have with my study partners. Whereas when I'm running bad, I might even sit down almost every single day in order to figure out what's wrong, even though there might not be something wrong, but it's always good to refresh all the stuff that you learned in order to be more precise in the future. And this probably also, influences the length of the downswing, because then you just start getting more precise, you get more confident again because you work on your game. And yeah, this is, I mean, even if financially or like money-wise, the downswing is always bad, this is just long term. I think downswing can be very beneficial for someone's poker career.
100%. And I've noticed this common trend where players who reach the top, very often they talk about downswings so differently to other players, where it's always, I have self-doubt, therefore I learn, I study the most, I make the most growth in my game during downswings. It's almost like a downswing is a catalyst to work in your game and get better. Whereas other players, downswings, they lose confidence, they start panicking, they have more emotions, they start either acting erratically in terms of their game, they change their habits, they change their lifestyle around, they study either differently or less, and lots of things happen from a downswing which take them off path. Whereas for you and other high stakes players, downswing means, all right, study harder, get more self-confidence. So a question I want to ask on this topic is, what happens if you push this too far? So let's say someone listens to this and going, okay, I've actually got a lot of self-doubt in my game right now. I tagged 50 hands yesterday, the day before. I'm really not feeling very confident right now. So I'm going to study like crazy. I'm not going to play much right now. I'm just going to study. And they get in that trap of trying to build confidence by studying everything, trying to learn everything so they can come back. And as we've talked about today, it's such an infinite game. Even the best guys know next to nothing compared to what you can. You can go down a rabbit hole of trying to gain confidence through studying, but never getting there. You never quite get that box ticked enough. So any kind of thing you would say to those players who maybe push that studying or trying to gain confidence in the game too far to override self-doubt? Anything that you could recommend for them?
I mean, I think what could work in that instance is like studying obviously a reasonable amount, but having some sort of structured plan of how much do you want to study, what do you want to study, not just mindlessly looking at Piosolver without any sort of game plan. Just think about what do you want to learn before you start studying, and then trying to come up with, a strategy even for studying that is the most efficient. And I think not playing at all and studying only is probably also not beneficial. So I think if you're in that spot where you're on a downswing and you're really, your confidence took a bit hit and you want to mainly study, I think the best thing is either just move down 1 or 2 stakes in order still to get volume in and still to keep playing hands and still to like be in that moment. Because when you play a game, you just have a limited amount of time to make a decision. Whereas in the solver, you look at spots and everything seems so logical. But when you have to translate this into playing, like it oftentimes is very, very, very hard and very, very difficult. So I think even though you want to study more often, you could reduce the amount you're playing. But if you just don't want to deal with the emotional stress of losing, like you can just either, let's say you play NL 100, you can just play NL 50 or NL 25 for a month and mainly use this month for studying, and then come back at NL 100 again with like a set confidence.
Amazing advice. Yeah, I think that's bang on, because the player's basically trying to regain confidence. So he wants to work in his game in a safe environment, but at the same time, he needs to play to get his game sharp and also to implement the things he's learning. And if he pushes any of those variables too far, he's going to, it's going to be suboptimal. So I think for yourself, the way you think of stuff, you're always thinking of what's the end goal. So the end goal is to gain confidence, improve my game. So I need to be playing in order to improve, to get my game sharp, but I also need to be studying. So yeah, I think creating those dynamics where you can move down stakes, play safely. And yeah, I think it's really good advice. I hear some players who I'm more surprised when players like have a downswing and they do very extreme things. They're like, all right, I'm just going to study for 3 weeks straight. It's like, that's an interesting choice to approach a downswing with. It's like, what made you think that was going to be effective? So yeah, I like your very calculated, strategic way of approaching that. Really good. All right, Rene, yourself, when you're on a downswing, anything you do to get yourself back confidence to get back to the games?
Yeah, kind of similar. You similar what Josef said. You start to study more. I think it's very important as like a prevention, because I've been there, that I would then overly study. I definitely agree you should keep on playing. That's very important. But maybe prioritize. So I would then look at my game and be like, okay, where's my game most off? And like it's again also certain acceptance. Okay, I'm playing like shit, but that's also just because you're not feeling confident, blah, blah, blah. Then if you start to study, if you prioritize, okay, these are probably my biggest leagues, let's work on those. Then you just feel more confident in those, and guess what? Then you also start to play the other spots better. Like you cannot try to learn the whole poker tree. So
Yeah.
focus on the areas that you're currently most uncertain about, that trigger most uncertainty, because it's mainly that when situations trigger uncertainty, you feel uncertain, and therefore you start to make poor decisions in all the areas of the tree. So I would study mainly the areas that trigger you the most. I would say that's my advice, and that's actually exactly what I would do as well. I can just get annoyed by a couple of spots that keep on occurring there where I feel lost. So that's a trigger. Then I don't have to, solve poker. No, I only have to look at, okay, these situations are really annoying me. And every time it gets me into situations that make me doubt myself, and that makes me play worse in other situations. Let's try to come up with a good game plan for those situations specifically. I think that would be, that would be good advice. We're gonna almost wrap this up. I'm curious, going forward, what are your goals? Just continue on your path towards trying to become the best poker player you can be?
I mean, that's the ultimate goal, yes. But I mean, I don't have any specific goals. Looking back when I was playing 200, when I was playing 500, I thought these guys were crazy playing 300 on 2K. I didn't understand. Now I'm sitting there every single day, and it's hard to explain to other people like why I'm doing this, because yeah, in terms of money it doesn't make sense, but in terms of like self-improvement and like improving a game, I think it's okay.
It ups the necessity, right, to show up and to have a solid strategy. Whereas if you purely bum hunt, you'll be like, why would I put in all these hours of studying? Like, why would I need to improve my game? Like, I don't face any competition.
And I don't have any specific plans of playing like 10K nosebleeds or 20K nosebleeds, because I think the amount of money they battle is absurd. And like, a couple of BB in win rate and the swings you would experience are insane. But
to be fair, you said the same when you were playing 500 about the 2K.
That's I just wanted to make this point, like I wouldn't rule it out if I actually could make it to the stakes and I have the bankroll that I would comfortably battle with, and I could see some opportunity if occasionally sometimes I feel like that there's weaker, that I would at least try to play in these games. But that's definitely not the goal. I just basically it's what I said earlier. I just appreciate every single day that I can start grinding and live this lifestyle, and for as long as I can do this, I'm very thankful for that. And if the path that I take gets me to 10K nosebleeds or 20K nosebleeds, so be it. And if not, it's all right too. Like I'm in a position where like if I stopped having this competitive drive, I probably could just bum hunt for the next couple of years without studying once and still make a decent amount of money. So I'll see what the future brings, and whatever game I might be playing, that's the game that I I want to play, basically.
Curious, what do you think is something in your current game that still needs improving, maybe in order to jump in these battles at the 20K, for example?
That's probably a really tough question, because if there was obvious leagues that I could improve on, I would probably do that. So most of it would just be the required bankroll that I need for myself in order to play these games. And then what I would also do before I jump into it, I would try to, like the same thing that I did on Stars when I rec battle, is like I look at all the data that I have available for the guys that I play against, and find, or at least figure out how they approach the game. And if I think that I'm somewhat competitive, or like if I can play in this game without losing, then I would just join.
Yeah, so it's like if you can see where EV comes to you, then and that makes you feel confident enough that you can beat the game, then you will sit down. I think it's a hard question, because you always you don't know what you don't know, right? Like
yeah, exactly.
If you have an obvious leak, but this is also sometimes you look at your game and you look through it through a certain lens with the knowledge that you have now, and you don't see leaks. Whereas a year later, usually, if you look at that same game, you're like, I did have leaks. I just wasn't aware. So I guess it comes back to what like a team throughout this pod, like to stay open-minded, and discuss with others. Maybe they sometimes say something like, oh, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Oh, wait, if that's true, then probably this is true as well. And that maybe leads you to a certain strategic.
Yeah, I mean, something that is probably a bit more problematic reaching these like nosebleeds games or like the highest stakes that run is that, let's say you play 200, there is like, you have the 500, 1K, 2K guys that have less leagues you can look up to compare their stats. But at some point when you're at the top, there is no one that is,
to compare
objectively better. So you probably have to work out a lot of things on yourself, which I'm not sure if, I mean, obviously would work, but you would have to come up with a different game plan as before, where you could just compare to the super crushers, like your own stats, and figure out how they approach the game, and then try to sort of implement some ideas into your game and to improve your win rate. Whereas on these stakes, this is not possible anymore because you're just playing the highest stakes, highest game stakes available versus the best players. So that you would just have to come up to play like Stefan, come up with different ideas where you think that you can have an edge by just playing a whole lot of different strategies and thinking that others are not as good or like are not as good as at coming it up by the fly or like freestyling versus that strategy as you having done some research or started that sort of idea.
Kind of the element of surprise, of chaos.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Or you just be so solid that you don't lose, and you just hope that other guys get lazy and collect some PB.
Which, if you look through the evolution of who's at the top over the last 20 years, that has happened, right? Staying at the top is often quite hard from a motivational perspective. Like,
yeah, I completely
to have
understand
that hunger
that,
to go towards the top. That hunger is not really the same to stay at the top.
Yeah, I agree.
But I feel like also when you play those games, when you play against the best, most likely they will start putting you in certain situations that maybe, you weren't encountering as frequent as before. So basically their strategies will make you think more about your own strategy if you keep on getting into this annoying situation that you're like,
yeah,
maybe there's something I can do about this. What advice no, not what advice, if people listening to this podcast, what would you like them to be the main takeaway that they leave with after our conversation?
The main takeaway is basically like that depends. Like in terms of poker, probably just be open-minded and stop thinking that you know stuff, especially when you play the lower stakes. Because looking back at myself when I was playing 200 NL, I mean, I was just terrible, and I would still like today. I think I know like a little bit about the game, and I try to have a solid game plan. But at the end of the day, it's just so complex that you just have to be very honest in yourself. And there's no one on this universe that has this game figured out and can even be close to like a GTO bot, so to speak, unless you cheat. Therefore, I think just being open-minded for new ideas and try to focus on your own rather than looking at others. And if you look at others, think about what that, like, let's say, like if you think about others in terms of them being bad, you should always think like one more street in terms like what's the logical answer, or like how should I change my strategy when I play against these guys, rather than just complaining about them being bad. I think this is probably one of the biggest problems that low stakes players have in general.
It's again, right, looking at the opportunity for the situation, not whine about the situation.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I really like that. I thought actually you were mentioning like, let's say you get 3-bet 10 times in a row or something. It's annoying. Actually, I thought you were gonna say, oh, this is great. I hope I get aces next hand and he 3-bets me again. That I thought would be a really Josef thing to say. Actually, I heard you mention it as well. This is I have been using it actually when shit situation comes up. Like I fold, hope to get aces next hand. I remember you told me that once. I was like, yeah, I'm definitely gonna keep this.
Yeah,
but it's a
just
very
good
good one.
Like you're very excited for the next hand already when you hope for aces. Then you don't have troubles folding or like just letting go
exactly,
with the last
right?
one.
But I like this one as well. If someone 4-bets a couple times, 3-bets, like, oh, this is great. I hope to get aces next hand and he does that again.
Yeah.
So statistically it's less likely, but hey, let's not let's not ruin our optimism with logic.
Yes. That's
any last words you would like to share with our audience, Joseph?
I think everything has been said that I wanted to share. It's been great to talk to you guys, and yeah, still appreciate being here.
Adam, you have any final questions for Joseph before we let him go?
No, I'd like to thank Josef for sharing his wisdom. You're a very wise man, and you've shared a lot with myself and Rene. I'm sure the audience are going to go away from this and reflect on a lot. So thank you for your time, and we appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Joseph, for educating the listeners. Definitely a podcast I think worth watching back, listening back, taking notes. What do you think, Adam?
Oh yeah, I'm going to be replaying this. I'll also be doing the timestamps before everyone else has watched it. So I'll be definitely listening and taking notes. But yeah, great guest and so much to share here. One of the main things I was getting throughout the whole conversation was how he's got this really clear objective for his life to be the best version of himself, especially in the poker context. And this is almost like making life a game of getting better and leveling up. And everything is looked at through that lens. So often he'll speak about things very simply of how to zoom out and look at his overall results, how to not get attached to emotions, how to reflect on his performance and get better. And it's all coming from this lens of how do I be the best? How do I level up my kind of performance? And yeah, that's kind of the standard he holds himself to. A skill that was just super powerful throughout the whole conversation was perspective. It came up in terms of being optimistic, in terms of not getting too down on himself during downswings. And it feels like he's just cultivated this by being very intentional with his actions, but also reflecting a lot, like not like journaling, not going away and just writing stuff down, but constantly thinking about how can I get better? And it was really interesting when he talked about emotions, and he literally like kind of broke down exactly like what I teach my students on how to overcome emotions in the whole framework. And he has talked about when he feels an emotion, he will just watch the change in his state. You'll see the trigger event that caused it, and then he'll just use his rationale to realize if that wasn't helping him moving forwards. And that's it sounds so simple when he explained it, but for most players, they struggle with that because they're not is intuitive with their own body. They're not as introspective what's going on, and they're missing all these moments where things are changing. But because he's constantly thinking, how do I do better? He knows that emotions can play a big role in his decision making. So if an emotion comes up, he's like, oh, flag that. Emotion came up. Did that impact my decision? And sometimes he'll go back and realize something needs to be fixed. Other times, he'll be like, all right, actually, that's fine. That's just a normal human emotion playing out. He spoke a few times about the human being a human and like not being human, so to speak. And I was thought very funny because it was trying to convey the point that we often have a lot of logical kind of frameworks of thinking, of acting that don't help us as poker players. And if we can see those, we can often get past them by like, that doesn't help us in the poker context. And he's done a very good job of being very introspective and realizing when things come up so he can actually move past them. But yeah, I mean, his progression's been amazing. The way he's got so much wisdom at such a young age is amazing as well. So yeah, really took a lot from that, and I'm looking forward to watching it back to take some more notes. What's some of the things you wrote down, Rene?
That it's no surprise he rises to the ranks this fast. That's definitely it's no surprise there. And I felt the identity thing that you mentioned was very good. Like, oh, I'm a professional poker player. Like, this is just not. I don't tolerate, me tilting, for example. This is just unacceptable. And he finds ways to progress. When he makes certain mistakes, like this is unacceptable, so I will fix those mistakes. And he takes a lot of responsibility, right? He doesn't point elsewhere, he points at himself constantly. He's always looking like, okay, a lot of things are out of my control, but what's in my control? What can I do? Right? And that gives you, I think, a lot of power usually. The fact that you actually have way more control over things then you might actually think if you take on a bit more of a victim mentality type of thing. Definitely the optimism. Hope to get aces next hand. Like I said, I speak to Sunny off podcast various times as well. And the perspective, I've seen this many times in action where if he just thinks so positively, and it's really I hope it's very contagious. Because then I will start to think a lot more positive as well, even though I do think I have that as a trait as well. He talked about don't put better players on a pedestal. This is something that we've heard many times, right? People just give other people way too much credit. I think it was also in the Plenty podcast that I also asked, like, why are people stuck at 100 NL Zoom? Yeah, because they think 200 NL Zoom people are amazing and they're constantly working on their game to be ready for 200 NL Zoom. Whereas if they would just jump in, and stop giving people all this credit, they will see it's not a big deal. Everyone, to talk in Josef language, everyone still sucks, you included, and that's okay. Structured approach to learning, right? I think he gave the example of, he saw a streamer practicing leading spots, hijack, what was it, under the gun versus hijack in a 3-bet pot that only comes up a couple times a year. He said, no, you just want to think about your strategy, focus on the most frequent spots or spots that have the highest EV, come up with a solid game plan, right? Don't make things too complicated, and then in-game figure it out from there. Start with a good theoretical base, and then in-game start to see how the equilibrium shifts based on the opponent that you're playing against, based on the ranges that you're currently facing, okay? But it's very important to first know the theory and have studied the theory in order to make that sort of in-game node lock in your head, where you can say, okay, some things have changed, knowing how I know that theory works, what would now be the correct solution? Let me see. This one was also a point I wrote down. Every battle is won before it's lost, which is like a quote I got it from Sun Tzu, where it's like basically before he goes into a battle, I think this is something that George also mentioned, he already kind of knows what the leaks are and how the money is going to flow towards him, which already gives you a lot of initial confidence and gives you a certain sense of control. Also in terms of knowing what kind of strategies your opponents are executing. I think he also mentioned we don't all agree on a certain strategy, or some prefer a different strategy. So you shouldn't be suddenly caught off guard, right? By, oh, whoa, I didn't expect this overbet here. Now what do I do? No, if you play against someone regularly, you should kind of know what kind of things you will be facing so you can prepare accordingly. Also in terms of expectations, swings are huge. If you lose 10 buy-ins, don't start to immediately doubt yourself like, oh, I'm probably not beating these games. Realize that this could be just a normal swing that you could encounter, all right? I mean, we could go on and on and on. I would highly recommend re-listening to the pod, take notes, and see how you can implement all this knowledge that Josef has shared into your poker career. We're very curious what your main takeaways are. So like this video, subscribe, leave comments down below with your main takeaways. Then GTO Wizard will pick out one lucky guy or girl that gets a free subscription for 1 month to GTO Wizard. So leave your main takeaways down below. I want to thank Adam for co-hosting this podcast with me. I want to thank everyone for tuning in again. And I hope to see you guys in the next episode.